All right, it's 7 o'clock, so we'll get started. Welcome everyone to the Infrastructure and Environmental Services Committee meeting. My name's Ethan White. I'm the presiding member of the committee. I'd like to welcome elected members, members of the public and guests that are presenting tonight. Thank you for joining us. We'll begin with the statement of acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge this land that we meet on today is the traditional lands for the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region, and that their cultural heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. Item 2, attendance record, roll call. I believe we have all members here, which is fantastic. No apologies. Oh, actually, we do have an apology from Councillor Shanks. He will just be running 5 minutes late. So we'll put him down as an apology for now, but he should be here shortly. Motions to grant leave of absence. Is there any motions, members? There be none. There's no leave of absence and there's no non-attendance. Public open forum, we haven't received any requests. Deputations, we do have a deputation from the Honourable Tony Piccolo MP, who is joining us via Teams. Mr Piccolo is going to be speaking regarding the street naming item. Mr Piccolo, if you can hear us, you've got 5 minutes and we're ready when you're ready.
Closer to what I'd hoped would it be achieved. Having said that, I still think the recommendation or the motion passed by this committee and recommendation to council could be improved. And in doing so, there's 2 points I'd just like to make, and then I'll be suggesting some changes to the recommendation itself or the motion itself. The first thing I would like to make is that the reason I'm using the full names in the case of Jack Clark is because Clark's quite a common name, and it's very important that we actually make sure that we're honouring the right person, and because we already have a Clark Avenue. The second part is in the case of Meredith Crome. Firstly, she doesn't. I want to use the word name Meredith Crome because the reality is most of the streets are named after men. If you just use the surname, it doesn't actually emphasise the fact that Meredith is a woman. And I think it's about time we try to rebalance that in our street names and public places to make sure that women are acknowledged. And so that was the reason I've used the full names to acknowledge that. And I also noticed that's not necessarily inconsistent with either the council policy, which is 3.123, names of prominent or eminent persons. And if you look at the other part, an individual's given name together with a family name is essential to identify the person or where necessary to avoid ambiguity. So the policy does provide for it. It does say we should avoid double names, and I understand that. But even when you look at the government policy itself, it does give that little bit of flexibility to include two names with a legitimate reason to do so. And I think in this case, given the two individuals, one case there is an existing Clark Road, and secondly, Meredith Crome is to identify the person as a woman, and a woman who was pioneering woman in local government. The difficulty I have with the recommendation and my suggested changes is that I think at this point in time, to ensure that the council does make a recommendation which offends the families of the people involved, I would like to leave some flexibility. So my recommendation would be that part 2 of the recommendation would be amended to council adopts the proposed inclusion of the name Jack Clark to be approved for street name register with street name register. I stand corrected. Sorry. Part 1 of the motion. Council adopts the proposed inclusion of the name Jack Clark to the approved street name register for the purpose of being used as a street name or a public place. So that gives the council some flexibility when it talks to the family. It could actually do one or the other. And also when it looks at the various options and perhaps engage with the committee, both options are still available. And in part 3, council adopts the name Meredith Crome to be added to the approved street name register for the purpose of being used as a street name or a public place. So the benefit of this, it still keeps those two names in consideration. Secondly, enables time to engage with the families to make sure, in the end, the council decision is an offence. And for the two reasons I've identified already, it would actually achieve the objective of why we're putting these two names up. Happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Piccolo. Members, do we have any questions regarding deputation? Deputy Mayor Davies?
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're getting... I'm looking at the motion and Clark is being spelled with an E on the end. I think my understanding was that there was no E on the end. I just want to make sure we're approving the correct surname.
Might defer. David, would you be able to answer that?
Through the chair, we'll just double check. Bear with me. Unless Tony can confirm.
I'm just looking through my papers as well, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I should know this. You're quite right.
We'll just get confirmation, but I believe there's no E in Clark.
No, all the documentation has got an E on the end. I assume this will be a recommendation to go to council, or does it actually stop
Yeah.
the committee tonight?
No, that's correct.
In that case,
It will be.
if there's a technical error, we could actually the council could have corrected it at its full council meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, if I just could for a second, just to clarify what I'm proposing to the committee is that parts 1 and 3 would be deleted, and parts 2 and 4 would be amended to what I suggested, and parts 5 and 6 would then follow.
No worries. Thank you for that. We'll double check the spelling, but if there is any inconsistencies, it will go to council and can be amended in the minutes as well if need be. I believe David is just confirming too, so we might come back to him later when we get to that item. Is there any other questions for Mr. Piccolo, members? Yeah, Councillor Shanks.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Probably not for Mr. Piccolo, but just through you, Chair, to staff. The proposal put up by Mr. Piccolo seems somewhat reasonable. I'm just trying to fathom why we restricted ourselves to one or the other and not looking at that broader picture.
Yep, no, good question. I might defer to David if possible.
Thank you. Through the chair, so staff's recommendation is just based on our interpretation of the policy and also previous council motions where we've gone back and removed double ups and names that don't meet the policy.
Councillor Shanks.
Okay, just I guess to rephrase, is there any problems you see with an amendment to this level? To me, it seems pretty logical, but this isn't my profession. I'm not over the policies to the degree I'm sure you guys are.
David?
Yep, so staff don't have any objection to it. It's just based on what the current policy says. So council can go and move the motion as set by Tony. We have no objection.
Thank you. Councillor Koch, then Councillor Solomon.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I remember we had an issue with roads that were named very similar, and the issue we had was that emergency vehicles had trouble identifying the roads, especially when the operators are, say, in Adelaide or potentially interstate. And so the whole issue was that we actually kept away from names that were similar because, you might have an ambulance going to the wrong street which would be horrific, absolutely horrific. So I do get concerned when we have names that are very close, which may cause that confusion, and somebody who's called an ambulance, it might go to the wrong street because people just don't live in Gawler, don't know the situation, don't know the history. They look at the name. Oh yeah, right at Clark, bang, away they go, and they go to the wrong place. So that's one of my big concerns, and that's what happened. We had to actually change a street name because of that. Because when I think the bypass went through, a street was cut in half, and there was a street name here and a street name there, but different suburbs. But there was confusion constantly between where emergency vehicles would go. I'm not really concerned about pizzas going the wrong place, but I am concerned about emergency vehicles. Thank you.
No, thanks. I'll just remind, we'll just take questions for now. We'll save the debate for the item. No, that's all good. Councillor Solomon, did you have a question specifically?
Yeah, it's just about point 1 on there. As the motion currently sits, it says refuses the proposed inclusion of the name Jack Clark on the street's name registered to be used as a street name. And then number 2, it says it's limited to public spaces only. Does that not make it part 1 redundant, part 2 there, if it's saying it's limited to public spaces only? And I'm just worried as well about, what kind of, we're sitting here reading it now, but the public also reading that it could be quite confusing as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Councillor Solomon. What we might do is we might leave that for now. If you're happy to we'll bring that up. Did you have a question specifically? Whether you're, yeah. Look, I'll defer, I'll take that question and defer to Andrew.
My view of it through the chair would be that I guess we're just trying to be transparent, that the request was for a road name. We're saying no to the road name, but yes to the reserve. But yes, logic being what it is, you're right. Number 2 basically means you don't need to say number 1. But I agree, we'll deal with it perhaps when the item comes before council later on.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, members. Is there any other questions specifically for Mr Piccolo? No, that's all right. Thank you. I will just bring to everyone's attention too that on page 33 of 53 of the agenda, there is policy, council's policy at the moment, which may answer some of your questions. It might be worth a read before we get to that item. But I'll leave the debate and questions on the item specifically until later. Mr Piccolo, thank you for joining us and zooming in from Parliament. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Mr Chairman, with your permission, could I just make one comment before?
Please go ahead.
Okay. Councillor Cock raised a very important point. I was actually on council when that Hillier Road was changed, and we actually introduced the name Murray Hillier Road to distinguish it from Hillier Road, and that in fact actually supports my case why it should be, Meredith Crone and Jack Clark, because it makes it very clear.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your deputation.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
No worries. Have a good evening. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I have a declaration of interest on item 8.4, and I'll deal with that when we get there. Thanks.
No worries. Is there any other declarations of interest, members? Councillor Solomon?
Just a material conflict of interest with the Norma, item 8.4 there for the Norma cash advance facility, and I'll go into detail on that when we get to the item.
Thank you. Is there any other declarations of interest? There be none. Thank you. Item 6, confirmation of minutes. Just looking for a mover and a seconder for the IES committee meeting minutes for the 13th of February. I'll take them as read. Deputy Mayor Davies moved. Councillor Hughes seconded. Is there any discussion on the minutes? There be none. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll move to item 7, business arising from the minutes. I'll take it as read, but we'll ask any questions. Councillor Koch?
Yeah, I'm looking on page 7 of 53, and it's to do with the SA Water, the parking next to SA Water on Murray Street. I suppose it was designated potentially as an RV friendly to park there, but it seems like it's turning into an informal caravan park. So I'm just wanting to know what's happening there, because it says we're going to continue doing some upgrades there. I just get some update on that, thanks.
Yep, no worries. I'll go to Wendy or David. Who would like to speak? No, Jack? Sorry, Jack.
Thank you, through the chair. The caravan that was there for the last week has now left the RV-friendly area. Most of the people that are there are overnight or through the day, and then they leave in the afternoon. We have one sports utility type vehicle that spends most of the time there. The car is broken down, but we're working with her to get that car moved on. So she relocated there from another location, but we're dealing with her through the Red Room project to try and find some accommodation to assist her.
Thanks, Jack, and thanks for the work of the staff in that space. Councillor Hennessy?
Thank you, Chair. Just 3 items, and because some of them are quite dated now, I'm just seeking a bit of an update. So the first one is the biodiversity plan, which seems to have been on the agenda since 2014. Just looking for an explanation, please, of where we're up to with that. Seeing that we were going to review it last year, but that hasn't happened. Second one is the local design review scheme. I'm unaware of what that was, so could I have a bit of an explanation of that? And the last one is on the number plate recognition. How are we going with that? Because we were talking about having an engagement program before we move forward, and I'm a bit keen to make sure that we see that engagement program well set out, because I think potentially it could be problematic.
Thank you. Wendy?
Through the chair, so I can respond to the biodiversity management plan and the open space guideline reviews. I 100% agree. It's a bit disappointing there's a resolution from 2014 which hasn't been closed out yet. So we have been consistently reviewing those documents as part of multiple different projects that we do, and probably in particular the tree management plan that we're doing at the moment has been referring back to the biodiversity management plan. Open space guideline has got an addendum that it was used to develop an addendum to our land development and land division guidelines. And as it says in the status update, so the plan was at the June IES meeting, so the meeting after this one will come with an update regarding how effective that addendum is and what the process to manage and, I guess, close out this action is. I hope that's enough info.
Thanks for that, Wendy. The question around the number plate recognition technology. Jack?
Through the chair, we are very, very close to finalising that or commencing that project, but beforehand we will undertake a significant community consultation and information project, so at least we know and the community knows what this entails. There will be a trial period, and we'll have a few weeks of the program running where it's simply advising people of them doing the wrong thing if the LPR program actually works to how we think it will work.
Thank you.
And the third one was the local design review scheme.
Yep. Andrew?
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, this matter has been, I guess, bubbling away since 2021. We have not put that to council at this point in time, although the draft report has been prepared by Chris Hannaford. One of the issues with that was whether or not we needed to proceed with such an initiative, given that no other councils in South Australia had actually gone down that path. But what I flagged in the report, in the notes here, is that I think this actually might be something we could potentially utilise as part of our work on the urban design framework, and it probably is timely in the next 2 or 3 months, or maybe even earlier, next month or two, to get something back to council on it. The report's basically been done. There was also something that was talked about in the expert panel report on the PDI Act, which talks about the same issue, because the government's concerned that no one's using the scheme either. So it's probably timely that we come back to council over the next month or so with a report on how it could be applied, if at all.
Through you, Chair. Sorry, I'm missing a point. I don't actually understand what the local design review scheme...
It's basically a design panel that gives advice on DAs.
Right. Okay. And that is within the PDI Act?
The PDI Act doesn't actually refer to it as something to be achieved, but it's a view of government that the state architect thinks there is potential for a group to be funded or to be developed, which would provide some further oversight or some suggestions, which would allow for informed debate about applications that come before, I guess, ultimately CAP or through the normal process under the PDI Act. But as I've said, there hasn't been any take-up thus far by local government, just because perhaps it's seen as another layer of reporting to go through.
Yep.
And it's got no statutory status. It is advisory. But it probably is timely, given we've done the report, to come back to council in the next probably month or so. Yep.
Thank you. Hope that answers your question, Councillor. Is there any other questions relating to business arising from the minutes? There be none. Thank you, staff, for your responses there. Thank you, members, for your questions. We'll move on to item 8, decision reports 8.1, Gawler Growth Framework 2046 and response from Planning Commission. Now, we do have a presentation this evening from Michael McEwen from Jensen Plus and Charles Newland from SMEC. They're also going to be facilitating a bit of an informal workshop directly after the presentation. So what I'm going to do is invite them to present first, and then I'll ask members whether we're able to suspend meeting procedures for a short time, and we'll have a bit of an informal discussion and brainstorm that these two gentlemen will be facilitating. So we'll start with the presentation, though, within meeting procedures. So Michael and Charles, if you could just turn your mic on when you're ready, and you both have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Michael McEwen from Jensen Plus. My colleague Pat is with us on the front, and Charles from SMEC. And it was good to see you in February, where we introduced ourselves and talked a bit about the Gawler Growth Framework projects. And we're here to give you an update and also to discuss some of the potential outcomes a bit further with you. If you go to the next slide when you're ready. So in this presentation, we'll provide a recap on the overall objectives of the Gawler 2046 and the should be the Gawler Integrated Transport 2046. We'll give you an update on the technical investigations. Importantly, we want to give you a bit of a brief on the early engagement outcomes that we've recently undertaken in March. We'll tell you what we're planning to do next, and then we do want to speak with you as we move towards developing a future vision, guiding principle and scenarios in a workshop format, recognising that when we met you in February, you did ask for more time to provide more input at this stage. Next slide. Okay, so overall, we with SMEC have been engaged to prepare both a planning framework, which we're terming G2046, to develop on the bottom left a planning and land use vision for the town of Gawler, but also in tandem a transport vision through the integrated transport strategy. And from the community's point of view, these are really being seen as one strategic planning exercise to create a growth framework for the long term, which would get the term the Gawler Growth Framework. Next slide. And the framework focuses on the town of Gawler, of course, and that's our primary study area, which we've shown in bright blue on the map there. But we are very conscious of the surrounding development areas and non-development areas around the town. So we do have a secondary study area which takes into account the influences of the Roseworthies and Concordias and other nearby towns. Next slide. We showed you this timeline back in February, but we've moved on a couple of steps. So we have undertaken our background review in December, January, and statistical analysis. We'll talk a bit more about that. We did, in March, complete a community survey and drop-in sessions. We're summarising our baseline investigations, and we're about to move into a workshopping process where we'll identify some scenarios. There you go, that looks good, to test. And just recognising that we do have the workshops are a form of engagement, but we do have another stage of wider community engagement in June or July, where we'll have some draft documents where we'll be seeking your endorsement first, but then doing a public consultation process before finalising in about August. And we're trying to finalise these documents so they can be used. One of the reasons they can be used is to inform your submission to the Greater Adelaide Regional Plan, which we're expecting to come out as a draft later this year. Next slide. So as a recap, in February we told you a bit about our early observations. I'm not going to go through this, but we did undertake a thorough visit to some of the areas that are changing in and around Gawler. Next slide. We've had our heads in all of the strategic documents that your council has prepared in recent times and further back in time. For example, your work on retail, commercial analysis, land use, employment, land analysis in 2023. That's the blue ones in the bottom left. The draft Southern Areas technical paper and Southern Areas strategy, which you've looked at. The Greater Adelaide Regional Plan discussion paper, which is quite influential on the top left, but also your community plans, economic development plans, town centre urban design framework, and some of the other technical studies that we've looked at in the past around community infrastructure, open space, and the like. Next slide. So we'll move into the new information now, and one of the things that we've had our heads in, and we've been overwhelmed with data when it comes to, projecting future population and future housing demand and the like. As recently as March this year, the state government have issued an update to their population projections, not changing the numbers, but actually for the first time providing some local government scale projections. And so on the left-hand side there, those red diagrams show the population of the town of Gawler, which in 2021 was a little bit over 25,000 people. According to the state government projections, about 39,000 people might be expected in the town of Gawler under a medium growth scenario by 2046, and possibly more than that in the low 40,000s if there was a higher growth scenario. So we're very interested in these numbers. On the right-hand side, we're also interested in the kind of sub-regional population. So what happens if you include Roseworthy and Concordia? Well, at the moment, or in 2021, I should say, a bit over 31,500 people, but that number could potentially double in number by the mid-2040s if we see a high growth, population growth. Next slide. So what does that actually mean for planning? What are those sort of demand side factors that would influence future housing, employment and infrastructure needs? Well, the two diagrams on the left-hand side is essentially turning those population numbers into housing. So what we're doing now is trying to look at, well, how many dwellings might be needed if those growth projections transpired? And we are thinking that in the town of Gawler itself, there could be a need for 5,500 additional dwellings, or maybe even over 7,000 dwellings under that higher growth scenario, and a much bigger number if you take into account Roseworthy and Concordia in blue, heading over 10,000 new dwellings if the higher growth scenario was to transpire. So that's very important for us when we're thinking about where should this go and what's the pattern of development that we might look to see. We also know from some of your previous studies that we need to provide more land for employment, at least 20 hectares in purple of additional employment land, and there could be demand for additional commercial and retail floor space of upwards of 16,000 square metres, according to the Alinea study that you commissioned and was finished in 2023. So they're really important inputs. Next slide. If you turn to the supply side, so we've also been, I suppose, scrutinising and summarising what we know about where future housing is known to be happening and is planned for, is already zoned. All the areas that you know very well, Gawler East, Gawler South, Evanston South and Evanston Gardens. And also quantifying that, and on the top left, those little red boxes are just trying to summarise in brief where we think the known housing supply numbers are. So we think there's about 3,500 dwellings, a bit more than 3,500 future dwellings that's already planned for in the town of Gawler, taking into account zoned land. And a much bigger number if you include Roseworthy, Concordia. In fact, Roseworthy and Concordia together are over 13,000 potential additional dwellings. So that's the kind of supply side. So we're at the point of kind of looking at how those demand and supply projections sit together and what that might mean for the future planning scenarios. Next slide. I think you just missed one, if you go back, that's it. We're also at the same time, of course, scrutinising some of the planning layers, the issues, the opportunities, so thinking about existing land use, thinking about the zoning opportunities, analysing where not only recent developments are occurring, but also land ownership, And I'll just point out the sort of pink area in the second from left diagram. That large pink area is land owned by Renewal SA, which some of you will know about, which is a very strategic land holding and is an important planning consideration at this point in time for your council. We're also scrutinising the pattern of urban development in the town at the moment, lot sizes, infrastructure patterns, accessibility, etc. And on the right-hand side, we're having a good look at community infrastructure, and we are understanding the existing supply of parks and open spaces, schools, community centres, aged care, retail, employment centres. But importantly, we need to think about what the future needs will be once you take into account those additional population numbers. So we're going through that technical process and starting to make sense of all that now. All right, next slide. The next part of the presentation, Charles will just give you a bit of an update on the transport analysis.
Thanks, Michael. So I'll just be summarising what we've done so far with the traffic assessment, which is really focusing on, I guess, contextualising and understanding the problem. So we'll jump to the next slide. The first thing that we're going to look at are network operations. And I think before I jump into it, it's worth pointing out that there's a lot of interdependency within the transport system. So when we look at the network in and of itself, it does actually operate very well outside of the peak periods. But there is a clear issue in geographic constraints in and around Gawler. And these are primarily river crossings, which I've highlighted in the red boxes that you can see on the slide. And the real challenge is getting people through that kind of north-south movement. You can see there's a lot of connection through and around Gawler, but there is a lot of funneling that comes in to the main north-south portions of Main North Road and Murray Street. And look, that makes a lot of sense from a design perspective. Who wouldn't want to go down a beautiful historic street like Murray Street? But when we get into the congested periods of the day, which is primarily through the school peak, that's when congestion issues start to occur, and that's when we see a lot of the problems that kind of pop up that were identified as far as network operations in the consultation that we did. Obviously, there are additional north-south connections, primarily Schoenberg Drive, but that's not quite fully online yet as Gawler East and Concordia continue to develop, but we are cognizant of that given the development that is expected in that eastern area of Gawler, like Michael's been alluding to. So I think the interesting bit about understanding these interdependent, and just before I keep going on with that, with the network operations, the other big issue is freight and watching trucks move around the network. So I myself observed a truck trying to make a right-hand turn at 3:30 p.m. onto Murray Street. Now, it was very illuminating to actually see how the network performs and operates. And is that a driver behaviour issue? Is that a pathing issue? There are a lot of different kind of factors that play into that congestion during the peak periods. But again, it speaks to the interdependency of the problems. So then, moving on to the next slide, the reason there is so much congestion during the school peaks is generally because people feel like they have to use their cars to get in and around Gawler. So then when we have looked at the public transport system, it's actually very well designed in a couple of aspects, the main one being getting people to and from the Adelaide CBD. We can see here from the bus network that exists, it funnels people into Gawler Station, where they can then catch the train to Adelaide and then return home in the PM period, which is understandable and how you would, and seems to have been optimised for how the network wants to behave and where people want to go. I think the main issue that has come up with public transport is sort of the connection in and around Gawler. There are a few issues. The first one is a single track for the rail line connecting in to Gawler Central, which limits the frequency. And then there's the bus network in and around Gawler. So the 495 bus came up as a highly in-demand service, and that's because it's the best option from a public transport perspective to connect people to different activity centres. So during the consultation process, we heard how much people actually loved this service, this kind of on-demand Uber that they have, but they love it too much. There almost aren't enough services for the 495. So that also presents a potential opportunity to increase PT if there is that sort of demand, and also gives us ideas to think about with connecting different activity centres and things like schools with PT design as we move forward. Moving on to the last slide, active travel in and around Gawler. The main thing that we found with the bike network is the challenges with connectivity and the provision of cycling paths. However, there are a lot of existing networks that could be connected into. And something else that has come up with the possible provision of cycling is expansion of things like tourism in and around Gawler. As far as pedestrians go, one of the main challenges is with footpaths, an example of which you can see on the screen. People putting their bins out on one side and then services blocking footpaths on the other side, which it obviously makes it very challenging to use footpaths. With that said, we've had a lot of engagement with the different service providers, and the program around delivery of things like footpaths is actually quite sensible as far as balancing maintenance with the development of new footpaths. So that's it for us so far, as far as the transport infrastructure that we've found.
Thanks. And next slide. The last part of the presentation is an update on the community and stakeholder engagement that was recently undertaken. Next slide, thanks. And again. Okay, so we all know that the community and stakeholder engagement is very important, and we did, working with your staff, prepare an engagement plan to properly plan for the engagement activities. So the early engagement stage did include a presentation to yourselves back in February. We held an online survey for the month of March, 2 community drop-in sessions, all of which was promoted by your staff online, including some fantastic videos with, I think, councillor and community starring roles to promote the project and encourage people to get involved. So thank you for doing that. And we did also undertake some early engagement meetings with state agencies as well to hear their the government objectives for this region. Next slide. So just as a bit of a sample of the results of the community survey, so we had just under 100 responses to the online survey, which is quite a detailed survey. We had about 60 people drop into the 2 drop-in sessions in total, which were held around about the same time. So interestingly, just over 50% of the respondents were in the sort of 40 to 59 sort of mature family age group, and about 25% older people, and a little bit less in the younger adults. The 66% of respondents had lived in Gawler for 10 years or more, and the vast majority were also working or business owners, with 17% retired people responding to the survey. Next slide. I'll just give you a flavour of the first question, and then we've tried to sum up some of the outcomes. So the first question was actually about values. What do people value most about Gawler? Interestingly, number 1 response, and there was a long selection of options for people to choose from, was safety, which includes things like road safety as well as community safety. But being surrounded by nature was extremely important. Access to community services was extremely important. The open spaces was very important, as well as was the lifestyle for the community living here. And interestingly, the lowest scoring item on this survey of longer term residents was growing the township. We asked similar questions at the drop-in session as well, and we've integrated these, but just as a bit of a snapshot, the other questions we asked the community what future ideas they had for Gawler. We asked them if there were things that they didn't want to change. We asked them very specifically to tell us about their concerns and ideas about transport infrastructure, which Charles has already alluded to, and we asked them about other sort of planning ideas for the future as well. If you go to the next slide. So I've just tried to summarise some of those themes that we heard across all of the online and in-person discussions. So thinking about community values, first of all, and I've got a little word cloud here just to highlight the elements that were strongest, and it was about being close to nature, it was about protecting heritage, it was about the community services that the community enjoy here, safety again, open space, livability, the community feel and community spirit. The town centre came up as a strong value as well, and again at the bottom of the list was growth from the existing community. Next slide. On the transport side of things, the most important issue from a statistical and qualitative point of view was public transport, but closely followed by traffic flow, and some of the comments there related to not just congestion, but also maybe speed as well. But also, I think, importantly indicating, as you well know, that they're not just thinking about these issues for the future, they're actually saying, well, that's an issue now that we need to address. But walking and cycling was also high on the list of priorities. Freight bypass, rail extensions was advocated several times, parking, school transport, and noise pollution from the expressway was also brought up by a smaller number of representatives. So those were the community issues around transport, and then community issues around land use. Again, open spaces, wanting to have more and better open spaces, encouraging local business development through planning. So whether that be land for businesses or supporting, I think, comment about vacant premises and vacant land and vacant shops came up quite a few times. Heritage, medium density housing in key locations was actually identified by respondents to say, well, that should be done in the right places, as should aged care, schools, including public schools, protecting the rural landscape and agricultural context of the town, thinking about tourism opportunities from tourist accommodation, motels, etc., to visitor experiences. And also some respondents talked about the Greenbelt being very important as a separation between Adelaide and Gawler. So really strong views there from community members across those surveys. Next slide. I'll speak to the state agency summary last because the community views, I think, are more interesting and more relevant. We've held a number of meetings with departments, including Department of Infrastructure and Transport, DTI Plus, that's the planning department. Your staff have met with Renewal SA and the State Planning Commission on a number of occasions, and also the Housing Infrastructure Planning and Development Unit, who are responsible for the Concordia Master Planning. And a few of the snapshot comments, I think all the agencies are interested in long-term strategic planning, which is a positive, so they're supportive of your endeavours in that respect. They're quite clued into the Greater Adelaide Regional Plan, which is planning for high growth, and they're doing more investigations themselves on that. But also picking up on Gawler as a regional service centre now and in the future for the whole northern part of Adelaide and Barossa, and more important to provide commercial and community services. The Department of Transport are interested in growth along the rail corridor because it's an important asset that's been invested in and provides and has got capacity. They are undertaking their own Northern Adelaide transport study as well, which is useful. And again, Concordia Master Planning, which we are told is underway, and that they are intending to have their master planning complete by the end of 2025 was the sort of highlight comment. And next slide, I don't want to overlook that when we met with yourselves in February, you did tell us a number of things as well, which I think correspond quite well with the community feedback and some of the other feedback. So I won't read all that out, but there are a number of comments on transport, land use, community values, which we heard reinforced and emphasised by community members as well. So what does all that mean? How do we crunch together all these demand, supply, bits of information and the community engagement summary? Next slide. Well, what we are soon to do is undertake some workshopping in our groups. So we've got a couple of collaborative design workshops, and there's a little note on that on the left, where we're going to work on some visioning, some guiding principles to look towards this growth framework. And when I say we, that's the project team. We want to investigate different growth scenarios so that we can test what they might mean for your future. And we definitely want to integrate land use and transport considerations. So what we were proposing to do in the workshop session, if you wish to follow, is to ask really 3 questions, which are in that big circle there. And we'd like to record your comments on our worksheets. But we're interested, of course, in your feedback on the community engagement that we've described. But interested in your input towards guiding principles. What are the themes and elements that you think should really drive this plan, and your visionary ideas, which you can add to. And we're also interested, number 3, are there any particular development scenarios that are of interest to you? And let me explain what that means. You might have a view about a certain location that you think should be investigated thoroughly, or you might have a view about the scale and quantum of development or the form of development. And those types of scenarios we are looking to investigate. So we might take advantage of your time to hear what you think should be in that package of scenarios. So those are the 3 questions that we are keen to hear from you on this evening. Thank you for listening to the presentation.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you, Michael and Charles. Just before we get into the workshop side, we might just ask if there's any questions on the presentations. Councillor Koch, I know you've got some.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. The first one is, what value are you going to put into community consultation when you've actually heard from the community that they don't like growth, they want to retain the green belt, they want open spaces, and they want to retain the rural landscape, which is complete opposite to what I'm reading in all the other documents. So are we just saying this is a fait accompli, you're going to lump it, love it or lump it, and that's it? Or what's the role of this engagement? You've asked the community. We have endless community plans which say exactly the same thing. It's no surprise to me that the community says exactly the same thing as it's said in the community plan year after year after year. So where are we now? Because you've gone to the community, you've asked them, and you've got the answer.
Thank you. Well, we've gone to community and stakeholders, including the state government stakeholders, and they've not all told us the same thing. The state government certainly have a view through their departments that there is pressure for housing and population change, and so that they are saying plan for that. And not unsurprisingly, some of the community who live here now, that's maybe not as important to them because they've lived here a long time, they are current residents, they maybe have a home, and so future housing is not necessarily their priority. One of the difficult things with planning for the long term is we're often planning for people who are not here yet. Either they live somewhere else or they're simply not even born or they're still at school. So we need to think about those people and their views which we might not have heard through the community consultation. The other part of your question about things like open spaces, community services, greenbelt, they are all excellent clues for us to put into these scenarios, to put into this plan to make sure that as far as possible we do achieve those outcomes in the long-term strategic plan, and that's certainly what we intend to do.
Yep.
Could we just go back to, Michael, your presentation with the little eggs and when it talks about the growth, the rate of growth? Yeah, it goes back, yeah. And it talks about, where's the little eggs? That one, those eggs. Okay, so the one on the orange one, it says medium growth by 2046, 39,000. So that's 15,000 people, isn't it, from where we are now? That's 5,000 houses, isn't it? Because if it's 2.5 people per house, that's 5,000. Now, in our agenda item, we've got page 14 of 154, it talks about 5,000 dwellings at Cuddler and then another additional 5,000. So that's actually 30,000 people, I think, but I need to get that clarified. So that's actually way up the top. That's actually, that's 55,000 people. I mean, I don't know whether all this is matching, really, because it's 1 minute we're saying 5,000 is probably the medium growth, which is probably historically what has happened in South Australia. Certain people like to talk it up, and we've actually discussed that here, that we didn't actually agree with the high growth scenarios. We actually agreed with the median growth scenario. So all of a sudden, we've got potentially 10,000 dwellings, which is, 30,000, is it, 25,000 people. So, I'm just a bit confused where these numbers are, because, I know the state government's got its view and departments have got their view, everything else, but this is really imposing a lot on Gawler for a town that it would just be urban sprawl from Noarlunga to the other side of, Roseworthy, and there'd be absolutely no separation, which is what people want. It'll be just wall-to-wall houses, and that's all we're looking at. So I I really need to clarify those numbers.
It is confusing because there's a lot of projections and there's a lot of numbers thrown around, and I haven't had the pleasure of reading your agenda, but I think you're referring to a 5,000 growth investigation area that the regional plan discussion paper added. Now, interestingly, that does not relate entirely to the town of Gawler, because that's described very loosely as an area that might include Roseworthy, for example. But look, the real point is that we should be testing in our scenarios, what should the right plan for Gawler be, and how much future growth can and should the town accommodate. And then we kind of go back to say, well, this is what we think the right plan is, and this is what we think the number of houses would be. And then the state government can balance that against the other locations that they are also responsible for planning for. So you're right that it's complicated, and you're right that there's big numbers being thrown around, but this is a good time for you as a council to look at your best option that you want to plan for, and then advocate for that strongly in the regional plan.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions in relation to the presentation? Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, I guess I think it was a well done community consultation. I went along on the Wednesday night and it seemed to be bustling with people who had lots of things to say. I think, I know with every community consultation there are going to be certain demographics that you're always going to reach, especially with council. It's no different for any council things we do. There's a less investment from younger people in terms of feeling like it's, this is their town to have a say in, especially if they don't even dream of owning a home at this stage. So I think it's hard to reach them, but that I think in some ways those are the key areas as you identified. A lot of our peaks where we run into big blockages are around school times, and so there's various issues with with young people's transport around the area that probably if we can deal with some of those, I think that's because we focus on the people who are working, and obviously that's important, but their use of cars is always going to be higher than everyone else's, especially since they could be working, if they work north of here, then they have zero choice but to get there by car, for example. But with school and all that kind of thing, I think there's a lot of efficiencies that could be made that might clear up some blockages in the town. That's just my thoughts.
Thanks. Do you have any more questions? Councillor Solomon?
Thank you, Chair. It's a small one, but just in relation to the public transport element. I'm just wondering, obviously there was quite a bit of interest in public transport there. I'm just wondering whether there was much mention of public transport going north as opposed to public transport going south, and also, other than the on-demand bus, what was the sentiment around all of those other services that we have going around the town?
So, very interesting question. As far as buses going north, it did come up in the community consultation. There is definitely, I think there was a desire expressed for it, but there is also, I guess, a kind of supply and demand balance issue that would need to be resolved, and that potentially extends beyond Gawler to coordinating something with Barossa Council to actually work out, okay, where are the hubs that we could connect via public transport, and then how can we kind of disperse people out from those points. Relating to your second question, as far as getting people around Gawler, unfortunately there wasn't really much that came up outside of the 495 buses, because people really wanted to use the 495 buses, and they were quite disappointed, I think, when they weren't able to. So yeah, as I mentioned in the presentation, definitely potential there to be connecting different activity centres around Gawler.
Yeah, Councillor Solomon.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just as a follow-up to that, obviously the Barossa is there and has, you know, quite an established township, but we're looking at the growth of Roseworthy as well. I guess is that growth in Roseworthy, but also any growth which may occur in the Barossa of Lincoln Concordia being factored into the viability of those kind of services moving forward?
Short answer, yes it is. Long answer, we're looking at it at the moment, and like we highlighted, the 495 goes all the way to Roseworthy, so there is an existing connection there, and that obviously exists because there's a demand for that service. You know, you can see clearly people want to use public transport to get around Gawler. I think it's just finding the right kind of balance between that supply and demand issue so that the system operates as effectively as possible and you get patronage within that.
Thank you. Mayor Redman.
I'd like to talk about footpaths, pedestrian crossings and cycling. So you put up a slide, I can't remember, with the bins. Where's the bins? They're the bins. Yeah, the bins block how people walk. So what's your solution to that?
Still looking into solutions, which I know isn't the answer that you want to hear, but we're looking at what are the possible solutions and thinking about that within the broader context of footpaths and what would be ideal, you know, for the town of Gawler, but then also thinking about, well, what are standards that are also achievable based on how it is used.
Follow up, Mayor.
We're 30 years behind with our footpath program. 30 years, yeah. So a lot of streets don't have footpaths. A lot of streets don't have footpaths. So we are not providing accessibility to our residents. And I think we can improve on that.
Thank you. Councillor Lorna.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to touch base on the land requirement, in particular for the employment land. We're talking about 20 hectares of land. Has that been identified somewhere in our township that this is going to go? What would be the good spot to put it?
Well, that's 20 hectares of land that's currently not zoned for employment that we need to find. So we are looking to do that through this process, and no, we haven't, or certainly our team have not got any preferred sites, but we'll be looking at that soon. So even in the workshop session, you're welcome to throw your suggestions forward for us to follow up on.
Yeah, Andrew.
Through the Chair, what I'd only add to that is that in the discussion paper, which will be updated with the work that's being done for southern rural areas, we did show that 20 hectare site in the south on Main North Road, near where that betting shop is, so whatever that street. It's on Main North Road, yeah. So there's a precinct there which could be expanded, heading away from Main North Road uphill.
Thank you. Is there any more questions, or are we happy to move into another question, Mayor? Or
Question around open space. You've looked at right across Gawler with our open space allocations. What about the southern urban areas and the open space down there?
Yeah, we're aware from previous planning that there is an identified need for a larger sport and recreation park in the southern part of the city of perhaps 20, 25 hectares of land and then embellishments. So that is a key input to our planning, particularly in the southern area. But we'll also look to identify, just at a high level, whether we think there's any other opportunities for other growth areas in particular. I think I recall that your staff are also working on an update to an open space and recreation strategy. Is that right? Andrew's nodding. So that will maybe the next level down of detail about how all those open spaces should be planned.
Thank you. Is there any other questions in regards to the presentation at this stage? If not, I think we'll press ahead with the workshop. I'm sure these guys are eager to hear our thoughts on a number of questions. So thank you both, Charles and Michael, for the presentation. I might ask Andrew actually that presentation be circulated or uploaded to the hub with the minutes. That would be great for everyone. Members, we're looking at doing a bit of an informal workshop, so I might suggest that we suspend meeting procedures if I have leave of the meeting to do so. Do I have leave of the meeting? Yes, I do. Thank you. So we'll suspend meeting procedures as of now. We will keep the live stream going, however, but I think this should make things a bit easier to run. So Patrick's here from Jensen Plus. I think Patrick and Michael are going to be facilitating this. We might ask you guys to actually bring that whiteboard further forward if possible, if it can wheel. Very good. And I know it's a little bit tricky, but if you could continue talking into the microphone if possible, you might even be able to commandeer Councillor Shanks's... Oh, there we go. Perfect. There you go.
Yes,
the last slide. No, Nikita, would you be able to put that up?
Councillor?
Yeah, that's perfect.
So we've got these 3 prompt questions that we'll take your comments on, and we can add more paper if we need to, of course, around your feedback on community engagement. And I actually heard one thing already, which I think we should add. Your input to the guiding principles and vision, and also if there's any particular development scenarios or elements of a scenario that you think we should include. On the feedback to community engagement, I think I heard, Councillor, a comment about the need to engage with younger families or younger demographics in the next stage of engagement. So I think, Pat, we should already record that, so we make sure that we're finding some channels, whether it's just through the right social media channels or it's through some other forums where we can engage with young families and younger people. Could be through the schools network as well, because we often get good input from engaging directly with schools, which are often a real conduit to community knowledge and interest. But maybe I'll invite any comments on the feedback first of all. Were there any other aspects of that feedback that resonated or not with you, Councillor Hennessy?
Yeah, I think what you've done so well has worked well. There'll always be a proportion of people in Gawler who will wait until they see something in writing and then feedback to that. They're a little bit more, whether it be time poor or just a little bit conservative. Little bit concerned, like Councillor Koch, that your comments that the most response came in from people with more than 10 years. And I sensed, I might be jumping here, that you felt there was a bit of a NIMBY thing happening. I'm going to dispute that. People who've lived here for 10 years have put 10 years into building this community. They have the right, very strongly, to make comment on what they want to happen to this community. The reason people come to Gawler is because it is a strong community. It is not just another suburb. So they're invested not so much in protecting their backyard, they're invested in helping the community that they've contributed to survive. It is a very different thing to being suburban and a strong community. So I just be a bit wary about saying that at the moment we're only hearing from the older residents. New people will come to Gawler not just to get a house. It won't be the cheapest place ever to get a house. They'll come because they want to raise a family and be part of this community. There are lots of other options, and the state government is, it's a broad sweep of different options of growth areas across the state. We've said it once, we've said it 1,000 times, we're not going to be the next Mount Barker. And I know the state government has learnt a lot from that, but this community is going to be really proactive in making sure that doesn't happen here. So, yeah, thank you.
So maybe, Pat, we can record that we did hear some diverse community views, I think. Another interesting one, when I stood out on the street most of the Saturday morning, I was amazed by the number of tourists that were coming past on the footpath, because I stopped everyone and asked them if they wanted to come inside. And about 50% of the people said, oh no, we're just visiting, we're from some other state. I was quite interested in that, and they were walking the main street and looking around. Other comments on the community feedback? Does that resonate with what you heard, the summary that we gave? Yes? Any different perspectives that maybe weren't heard, Councillor Shanks?
Yeah, look, the overarching themes, I think, align, as Councillor Koch said, to the sentiments we've been hearing time and time again. What we do need to be conscious of is we need to be able to break the definitions down, because a green belt, what it means to me, to what it means to Councillor Koch and other councillors in the room, might be completely different in essence, in delivery. When we talk about heritage as well, sometimes, you know, someone that's very passionate about our heritage essence, but hates seeing it fall down because people are intimidated to even dip their toe in the development, because the lack of investment will ultimately lead to the loss of the heritage. So if heritage is important, what does that mean? And how do we get to that preservation level as a collective, and how do we capture that in our vision, is where we need to break down those themes into the nitty-gritty. And I know this is the initial high-level conversation, absolutely. Your comments on school pickup time, absolutely. For someone that quickly ducked off and picked up my daughter today from school, that's a daily struggle for either me or my wife. That said, using the school networks to provide that conduit, I think is a bang-on idea, because there's no reason to reinvent the wheel, and I can guarantee that some of this feedback is already being captured through the schools, and some of that feedback is probably even being somewhat passed on to council as well. So it's there. It's just a matter of tapping into it. So I like that idea. The Greenbelt and the GARP is an interesting conversation, and one that we will keep evolving as the opinions start getting unpacked. But for me, I'd love to be able to see us use those open space requirements, the sporting precinct requirements and the like, to create those buffers and have them integrated with, you know, some good parklands and the like. And I'm not talking about the high service level parklands you see running down Memorial Drive and the like. I'm talking about more practical utilisation of restoring back to rural, you know, natural spaces that interact with sporting and the like. Commercial development, I mean, Tiver Road to me is an untapped resource and has been for very many years. Across the road from Tiver Road, you've got a commercial parcel that was actually rezoned, and we've just got this little square that has never been activated. The question there would be why, and what do we need to advocate for to promote that activation, and how does that then relate to, in that area, going forward with the relationship of whatever the residential development looks like that is maybe earmarked for the area. And are we talking about high-rise or urban sprawl, which I agree with Councillor Koch, you know, the model of let's just build more houses on smaller blocks. It's just more of the same. How are we looking at what's next on population growth management?
So let's try and make sure we've captured that. So definitely integrating the sporting park into the Greenbelt is a great idea. The Tiver Road opportunities need to be noted on that slide as well there, Pat. And also you're introducing a question, and this could be a good scenario. Is there a scenario where the housing mix is quite different from what we see today? And what would that mix be, both physically and as far as you know, what sort of households would it be suited to? So those are exactly the sort of things that should be on there. So we've opened up the other questions a little bit, so happy to take your input to principles, yes, Mayor, or scenarios.
Yeah. Through you, Chair. People come to Gawler to raise a family. They raise a family and they love the country feel of Gawler. And I'm picking up on what Councillor Hennessy said. We're not just a suburb. We have a sense of identity, we have a strong community, and we raise families here. So we have really good schools. We've got Trinity College, we've got Xavier College, we've got Gawler and District College. And those three schools have collectively thousands and thousands of students. With houses that are on top of each other and they don't have any backyards, what is your plan for open space? Because that is going to be a key concern for right across Gawler. So where will the open space be? Where will, and will we have enough? Will we have enough? Because we're going to be overrun by houses.
So I heard two things there that could be taken into the sort of principles field. One was about maybe it's more than two. One was about being a family-friendly town. The words might not be quite right, but family, country, town, and a complete town. And the other principle you were talking about was actually access to open space. And that could be a really strong principle that goes into this plan. And whether that accessibility is through, you know, just within a short drive, or whether in some cases you might say, well, actually we want everyone to be in walking distance of some kind of open space. And some of you are nodding your head and saying, yeah, that's a good aspiration. Those are the kind of principles and details that we can write in to say, well, if we're planning this area, we need to make sure we achieve that. Councillor Hughes, yeah?
With the open space, if it can be actually linked open space, we don't really want pocket parks, which are really hard to maintain and expensive. We actually want our open spaces linked, and it has been a real issue with a lot of our developments, where the developments seem to want to be insular and have a wall around them and be their own identity, where we want future developments actually to be linked and have that open space and pathworks, so they are part of the community. And also, I'm thinking with the cycle and walking paths, when I first saw you put High Street up there, I thought, yeah, that's actually a good ring route, and a lot of cyclists actually use that because you can't ride down the main street, so you use the streets either side of the main street. So those ring routes for walking and cycling, and it's also a mindset in Gawler that it takes many years to sort of break through that you're only a kilometre or a kilometre and a half away, or 500 metres from a lot of activity in Gawler, and people do think they have to shift their car a couple of 100 metres at a time, where you don't, because of our geography of high ground, low ground and hills, and that people just can't sort of fathom that it's only 100 metres around the corner to the next. So it's that wayfinding as well as that ring network of paths and cycleways and walking paths, and like the Mayor said, Joe, our footpaths are really way behind, but we need that priority, which I know the staff work on, to make sure the priority roadsides, footpaths are being done, but that needs that traffic planning and cycling, because most of our cycleways are dead ends in a lot of cases. They don't go anywhere. And are actually quite dangerous, because you end up, like near Vidulas there, straight into head-on any traffic. So, yeah, there's quite a bit of work to be done in that area, but it can be done. It just needs that higher-level thinking and longer-term planning, I think.
Sure. I'm hearing a few things there about connectivity. So you actually talked about connected open spaces, and then you talked about a town connected by walking and cycling routes. And I'm sure that you'll add to that, well, you need other forms of transport to be connected. So that word connected could also extend to community. In fact, you're saying, well, you've got a connected community now and you want to maintain that. So I wonder if that word connected is one of the key principles that might speak to a few different themes. So take note of that, Pat. So happy to take more input on the principles, or in fact, the scenarios, the sort of the layers that we should be thinking about.
Yeah, well, I jumped the gun a bit earlier during the questions and gave some of my feedback, but that's all right. I was interested when you showed that the way that the public transport, the bus network here, it's directed to route people into the city. And, you know, it makes sense, but it does mean that there's like, as someone using public transport, it takes me about the same amount of time to get to the Williston Oval, which is a 5-minute drive away, as it does for me to get into the city centre of Salisbury. They're both approximately 40 minutes because one of them is a 10-minute walk and a 30-minute train. The other one's a 40-minute walk from here. And so, you know, that's the kind of thing that if you're not going by car, there are places that are inaccessible, basically, in the sense that it would be easier to get into the city than it would be to get to some parts of Gawler, because it is primarily made around getting you into the city, and I think there are a few areas that are missing out on that front.
Was I hearing as well with the service that does operate, it's a little bit of a flexible service? Is it kind of on demand or partly on demand? Is that right? Right. So maybe I'm also hearing that flexibility in that public transport service is probably something that we think works for people and maybe should be a principle for the transport network to build upon, because you're saying that the line haul service is not flexible and it only works for certain journeys, whereas actually people need more of a flexible, for a smaller town, you know, you can't have everything, so you need that flexibility in the form of services. So that would be a good one. I think the Mayor had a comment on that.
People are telling me that the bus, the on-demand bus, is oversubscribed. So that needs to be worked out, because if you book a bus, my neighbour, she's 89. And she books the bus. She loves the bus. She gets herself organised. However, there are other people that tell me that it doesn't come. So it's oversubscribed. So we need more buses. We need and if you look at that those eggs, 63,000 people, wherever it was. Where is it? There it is, 63,500? Is that 500? 63,500, high growth 246. So it's, you know, Town of Gawler, Roseworthy and Concordia. We actually need to work with Roseworthy and Concordia and the Town of Gawler to have a seamless public transport system, because it's really it's quite disjointed now. If you catch a bus, it would take you an hour to get to the main street. You could walk faster than that, but some people can't walk faster than that. So they're happy to be on a bus, but we also need the buses to actually coordinate with the train. You know, if people want to go to the train station, they need those buses coordinated. So those buses need to be coordinated, and we need more bus routes. We just need more. We had 4 bus routes. They cut them to 2. And then they cut them to an on-demand bus. So I think that, you know, we're not being serviced through public transport currently, and I I hear that from people who come up to me and tell me these things, and they're quite frustrated. They're quite frustrated.
Okay, we're still sticking on the principle level. Maybe we add the word, more public transport as a principle as well. Comments on this side?
Yeah, jumping in there. It's just a good segue. There's a piece of work being done by the Regional Public Health Network, which is the 4 councils, Adelaide Plains, Light, Barossa and Gawler, and Jack is part of that, on exactly that. So earlier you talked about Gawler being a service town for Northern Adelaide and the Barossa. Gawler is actually a service town for the northwestern sector as well, the Adelaide Plains and Light, and has been historically and continues. So regardless of what's happening in development over Two Wells, there's a high proportion of those people who come to Gawler and will continue to come here rather than go drift that way. So maybe that's worth tapping into in terms of looking at what that is proposing. And the other point was just to strongly support what Councillor Hughes said in terms of all his points. But it's interesting to note that one of the unintended advantages of putting in our walking trail around Gawler is that it became a traffic route for our elderly and disabled. People on Gophers use that as a major transport away from the main street and away from the crummy footpaths to get from one side of Gawler to another. And I swear if you did a traffic count, there'd be as many people on Gophers as there are walkers and bicyclists. So.
Thank you. And just a quick comment, we are, of course, thinking about this plan in the broader context, including surrounding areas, and we are including the surrounding council staff in our workshopping as well. Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, yeah. Just on some of the feedback there, I just wanted to point out, we have a youth advisory committee as well, which is a majority of people on that are under the age of 19. Some of the loudest voices there about public transport, good planning, environment, cycling. So if you did a similar activity with them during one of their meetings, that would be might be of benefit as well. Of course, schools is a good one in there as well. I noticed the low number of over 80s, and there's probably not the numbers are probably not as high there, though. I do note that particularly as you start to get into that demographic in that older 60-70 bracket, not everyone, but you are more likely to have people who require sort of mobility aids or have a physical disability. And I'm just worried as well because obviously the location of the Civic Centre, and we saw what High Street looks like up there without the footpaths is very hard to get around. And so, making sure that we've actually captured that as well, and a bit of Councillor Hennessy alluded to there, around that accessibility aspect. It's all well and good to have a really nice train line that's accessible at the point of the station, but if you have to cross 200 metres of gravel to get to the train station, and there's actually no link in there, if you've got a mobility aid or you're in a wheelchair, it's impossible to get to the station in the first place. And I think that some of the bus stops around the town as well are in don't have that access also, which creates a challenge. And I think that's why the 495 service is so important. The on-demand is so important because there is a lot of aspects of sometimes you can't actually get to where the ordinary route is. Just on that public transport as well, the other services in the town seem to be largely based on getting people to and from Gawler Station. I think the Deputy Mayor alluded to that, is that there's not, I'm not sure exactly how, what it looks like, but there's not a lot of looking at how we connect the rest of the town as opposed to just getting people from, say, Gawler East into Gawler Station and perhaps pass through the main street on the way, as opposed to actually moving people around the town, not just getting them into Adelaide for work or recreation there. And then just also, that I think there's an important point around, that sort of Councillor Hughes alluded to as well, around those sort of insular, like you can, with some of these developments, have really insular communities there as well. And I think that, that actually disconnects people in the town at times. And, so we need to be really careful that we're not creating small pockets of communities as opposed to planning as a whole. And the last point which I'll make is that point about the traffic flow in the main street. I think any idea that somehow that traffic which is going through the main street is a benefit to business has sort of gone away now, because people know the traffic in the main street actually kills business. You've got, cars going through there, and it's almost impossible to cross the street at some times of the day. Pedestrians can't walk into businesses. The people who are driving through there, they just want to get where they're going. They have no interest in stopping in the main street. And people who live around the main street in Gawler and Gawler East will, go and shop at Gawler Green because they, can't be bothered trying to navigate those streets in around Gawler, even though it's a lot closer. So I think that taking the trucks, trying to get away from the trucks to get around the main street is a great thing. How you achieve that, I don't know, but I think it's a worthy thing to be looking at.
I think, again, a lot of these points, which are detailed observations, and I'm sure your constituents tell you about all these details, they're not necessarily asking about long-term strategic planning, but of course we want to start at the top level and talk about that connectivity for residents, for businesses, for existing and new communities. So those themes have got to permeate. I'm not sure how much time we've got left in the session. Is it 5 minutes or so? Yeah, and I know that Councillor Shanks has got a comment or two. I'm keen to get a couple of scenario directions from you as well. Are you thinking big? Are you looking for an option that's kind of a bit of a slower growth option? Have you got a particular, sustainable, what's the right fit for Gawler? I'm interested in your own views that we should be testing, but Councillor Shanks first.
Yeah, thank you. Just quickly on public transport, the high usage of that bus service just kind of cements the fact that the other services are broken links to the chain, which I think is some of the themes that have been picked up. Past Nathan will kill me for using the words like this, but a strategic activation would be a guiding principle, I think, because activation on any level, small or large, needs to have a sympathy to the bigger picture, and that's what I mean by strategic activation. When we talk about activation, and we talk about activation through the main street, if we use that as an isolated situation, we're seeing the development of Gawler Arms Hotel that we actually did the 14 hotel rooms that are up at the top level, so it changed a function area into an accommodation space. Which is highly sought after, and as soon as it's put on bookings.com, they're booked pretty in advance, which again leads into the shortage of accommodation we have. If you're saying you saw a lot of tourists, the chances are that they're not necessarily sleeping in the town. They've come in for a little bit of a day trip, which we always encourage, but chances are they might be going back to the Barossa or somewhere else and spending their money on the restaurants and the like out there. I've always had this massive vision, and I understand we've got 5 minutes left, so realistically I'd love to be able to put a map of Gawler and start pre-sainting it out with you, but that's another day exercise. But the end of the main street, just to touch on one, we've got the Mill Street Bridge there. I always see that as a really unactivated asset in relation to where we've got the Gawler Cinema and the like, and as such it just keeps on sort of floundering to a degree, and not to take away from the businesses that are doing well in the area, but that to me is a potential for an accommodation precinct, and utilising the river corridor and the heritage staple of the Mill Street, the mill there. Yeah, and again, not to take away from Steinborner, which is not Holden anymore, but a car yard right there of where I think we could be heading, and what that particular land space could be, a Henley Square-esque sort of tie in where that privately owned property is, that goes back to your accommodation precinct, that really really encourages people staying in the town and coming up the main street on the top of the existing buildings, utilising their top level to bring it up to compliance here for accommodation or other residential opportunities. So what you're doing is you're sleeping close to your CBD and you're able to wake up and walk down your stairs and be on the main street and really utilise the cafes and the like. I've been here for 17 years, raising a family for 8. I worked here at 16, 17 years old at a popular cafe here, the Java Hut, and our population has grown since then. So when my daughters are ready to do their first jobs and whatever, where are the opportunities going to be and available? Because the current stock is probably not going to support the jobs that are going to be needed for that generation running through, and people are going to have to leave the town. So what are we doing to be able to get in front of that as well? So, yeah.
Well, I think there's a scenario in that because there's a concept in the regional plan paper about living locally, and I think a lot of that is written to describe neighbourhood design, walking to the park or walking to the shops or bus stop, but it also means what is the amount of employment in the town, and at the moment you've got, I think, 0.67 jobs per person, which is a reasonable ratio, but if we're not careful we could end up with a lot more residents than jobs, and then people have to leave and there's not maybe as much employment opportunity for young people. There could be a scenario that says, well, actually, we want to, whatever happens, we want to maintain the same or more local employment as a ratio. And what would that mean? Would that actually mean we need more than 20 hectares of employment land? Would that mean we need a bigger town centre or a second town centre or not, you know? I think that's a really interesting scenario that we could test. I've got a few nodding heads. So the living locally and working locally scenario, we could test that, because that's not the one that will be the first one that, you know, the state government says to do. Other scenarios? Jack?
Through the chair, Michael, I just wanted to add that we've actually, just hearing the discussion tonight, we've actually contacted Metro Adelaide and said, hey, we'd like to talk. So we're actually trying to coordinate now a meeting with them to actually go through the issues that have been raised tonight in the chamber about the bus service. So, and that sort of flows on from, I think it was either a question or a motion at the last council meeting on this topic. So we thought, let's foreshadow that with the department. So they've come back to us and said, we're ready to listen. And we're just going to now go through the motions of getting together with them.
So that's on the existing services and future services. Anything else on the scenarios? Councillor Kosh and Davies had a comment?
Yeah, the scenario for me is I want to know what the ultimate number is going to be. Because we've got an agenda item, and in here we're talking about an extra 5,000 dwellings down at the southern rural area, which is actually our growth, which actually takes us to 39,000. Okay, that is extra to what we've already thought about. So I'd actually like to get in. I'd like to really understand. Maybe Mr. Goodsall could tell us what is the actual number that we're talking about, because you know we're all floating around here, but you know we've got some pretty big numbers. I don't know whether we want to go to 43 or 50,000. 39 seems pretty ordinary, I suppose, but that's just one development. That's one development that's been added in.
But do you think that we should test the medium growth, what that would look like for the town, and test what the high growth would look like? And then you could tell us which one you think is the right one. Well?
We'll want to, through the chair, people will want better services. They'll want better restaurants, they'll want better cafes, and we will have around about 150,000 people coming into Gawler, and hopefully in our main street with lots of cafes, lots of restaurants at a higher level, because that's where people want better service, they want better food, and they want better wine.
Well, that is, although it's a bit nebulous, I think there's something in the sophisticated scenario, like how many people and jobs and businesses do you need to actually be be able to provide those services so that they're able to open 7 days a week and they're viable businesses. So there's an interesting angle on how many people do you need to have nice restaurants or other types of amenities. Any other scenarios? Yes, sorry.
Yeah, I guess just to throw in a really big one right at the end, Carless Main Street as a scenario, a Rundle Mall style Murray Street. If we want to have nice cafes and people that actually want to wander around that street, then we should probably consider some big ideas like that.
It is a big idea, and look, I think it's worth thinking about, and look, even if the literal interpretation is not achieved, but what would happen if a lot of that traffic was not there and the people who were there wanted to be there because they wanted to shop or meet their friends, etc. And what would that look like and how would that feel? But a really good one to add. Councillor Hughes?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time at Kadina and through the top of York Peninsula, and there's been a lot of investment on their footpaths and their townships, and Kadina is really walkable, and they did it all at once. Moonta's very similar in areas, but Kadina, and they've put their car parking to the side as well, and really planned that really well. It's like a master. Well. And they have sort of gone one way with some of their streets as well, but you know, once you get used to it, I'm not suggesting we send Gawler one way, but yeah, just the fact that they've upgraded all their footpaths and made it so easy to walk around. It was a big investment at the time, but they did it all at once. We've been doing our main street in a number of stages for a long time. The main street's finished, but the streets around it aren't. When you go to other towns, you do see that they are more complete, and I think we've got to look at doing something very similar because we are behind the 8 ball and a lot of our footpaths aren't walkable and they're only just half a street away from the main street. It's terrible when you look at what other towns have been doing. So, as far as growth goes, I think that medium growth is where we've been sitting and probably more achievable. And so, I mean, it's always good to speculate, and I think, Joe, when you look at the higher growth models, you will get those higher growth scenarios. And I also reflect back to the Nord Parade, which I've spent a lot of time on as well, and that is just thriving, and the way they work their car parks and the parking and everything else is just really good. And they've got the high-rise apartment living, which is just going crazy. But it's all working, and it's really amazing. So I think that's somewhere where Gawler could be heading in the future as well. So I see those as sort of good models too.
So I think we've got the word walkable, but I wonder, there could be a scenario where we say, well, how do we make the most walkable town in the Greater Adelaide region? That would be a scenario, because it might mean, well, you can't grow too far in any direction because you want people to be able to walk back to the town centre. That's an interesting scenario. And I do think we need to test a higher growth scenario even for the reason that the state government planners, who hold a lot of the power, will kind of expect it, and if they don't see that, they will almost, there could be a risk that they will dismiss the exercise because it doesn't fit with their own particular instructions. So I think we want to test the different scenarios to show the good, the bad, the ugly of each one, because that's a good planning process. We're almost out of time and paper, I think.
Yeah, look, thanks, Michael. I might have a few comments myself. Look, I think everything that, the sentiment of the room, I had a lot of stuff written down. I did actually think that Councillor Solomon's suggestion about you running a similar workshop with the Youth Advisory Committee would be fantastic. We also have a newly established Ageing Well Advisory Committee, which sort of services the other end of the spectrum, which I also think may be beneficial, seeing as they're representatives of their respective communities. Running a similar style workshop, if you had capacity, I think would be really, really beneficial. All the things that were discussed, I had written down. I talked. One thing I did want to maybe put down in regards to the third poster is about diversity of residential development. So looking at different types of development as opposed to just the 2 or 3 bedroom housing. Councillor Shanks talked about high density living in the sense of the upstairs buildings of our main street, or whether it's single units, or whether it is larger dwellings. Just that diversity, I think, is not just an issue for Gawler, it's an issue for Australia as a whole, but that's something I'd really be seen to see where those discussions could go. Increasing foot traffic, keeping jobs within the town, facilities, hospitality, I guess looking at areas in tourism, all that stuff I had written down, which was all discussed. So that's all kind of the stuff I'd certainly be seen, certainly be interested in. And then the commercial site as well, I think, commercial development is so important for a number of those factors we talked about and I listed just then. So really getting an understanding of where our community sees those opportunities for commercial development while also working with our staff, as I'm sure you're doing it, going, what zoning do we have at the moment that's maybe sitting empty and where do we need to rezone? For me, that's probably the highest priorities, but I was really happy with the discussion. I hope you were too. Yeah. Are you happy with if we sort of wrap this up now? Yeah. Thank you. No, thank you both very, very much. I really appreciate your time. And I know, members, this was a bit of an informal, lengthy discussion, but I think it was a much needed one, and I think it's a really good way to use the IES meetings in a more in-depth, effective way on a strategic issue. So, thank you very much, Michael, Patrick and Charles, for presenting and running the workshop. Really, really appreciate it and look forward to seeing our next update. Thank you. So, members, we'll move back to our agenda now, and I'll resume meeting procedures at item 8.1. We have an officer's recommendation there. I'll look for a mover if someone would be willing to move the officer's recommendation. Councillor Solomon, would you like to speak to the item?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Happy to move the item here. I think some really good discussion happening there, and excellent job by staff to really, I think, bring in what are a lot of issues that we've dealt with over a number of years, really bring all of those together and take a comprehensive view of how we get to the root cause of some of these things that we talk about from time to time in the chamber. I think the conversation that we just had around this was quite positive in the sense that if we were able to fix some of these underlying issues, we may have slightly less problems to debate about in the chamber, to do with traffic flows, to do with issues around environment, even the viability of horticulture down in there, and the development or not developing in those southern areas as well. So I think this is a really good piece of work, and really happy to see it proceeding.
Thank you. A seconder, Councillor Hennessy.
Yeah, I'm happy to second this. Again, I echo Councillor Solomon's words. I think there's some evidence here that some really good in-depth work, some collaboration that's happening at various levels of government. I'm inspired by that. My one warning note is I think there's a degree of trust as we go through this process, and I'm sure we're all committed to that. But from my point of view, the whole discussion, and there's some good words there about this thing that comes by different names, the interurban break, the green belt, the parklands. I think that is going to be key to some of this. I think the sooner we can get some detail on that and what it actually will exist, the better, because I think that's where we will either keep some of the community with us or we will lose some of the community. But I'm happy to second the recommendation.
Thanks, Councillor Hennessy. Is there any other discussion on the item? Councillor Koch?
Yeah, I've got some questions.
Yep.
The first, I suppose, is through you, Chair, to Mr Goodsall. I've read all the letters, backwards and forwards. I'm a bit confused under what context those meetings happened, and I thought that would have been the Mayor's role to have discussions at that level. And I'm not sure whether some of the things that we were in, which I find strange. And then I'm just wondering whether any of those discussions have now committed us to certain things. So just that's my first question.
Andrew?
Thank you, through the Chair. Thanks for the question. Basically, the gist of this comes back to discussions in probably around August, September last year, where Henry and myself met with Renewal and the Commission. And I think I had David Barrett with me at the time as well, we were talking about the draft discussion paper on southern rural areas, and the suggestion at the time was there was a strong preference from the Commission and Renewal that we didn't proceed with the southern rural area discussion paper in terms of showing what we thought should be the outcomes on Renewal SA land, or to get too, I won't say stuck in the weeds, but prescriptive on how that should be developed without doing further work with the Commission and Renewal. So the advice that came from the organisation at the time, which I didn't have a great deal of say in, was no, we're going to proceed anyway. And that's what we did. So we came to you and we got a resolution to proceed with engagement in Feb this year, early Feb. Then, during that period of time, we got a letter from the Commission backing up their previous advice, which is we urge you again not to proceed and to take a more collaborative approach. And from that advice, I came back to Council, which was probably in January, I think, from memory, saying the advice we're getting is to take a more conciliatory, more collaborative approach to strategic planning in terms of the Greater Adelaide region and the Northern Corridor. I got a resolution from Council to defer the engagement, which you're part of. And then from there, there's been ongoing conversations. Because Council also had commissioned in the financial year Jensen's work on the growth framework, and given the feedback we're getting from Renewal, drawing these lines together, it came to me that we couldn't really have Jensen develop the growth framework without them also having some design principles on the southern rural area. So there are some things which we, in hindsight, would change. For example, the Commission had foreshadowed that the Cuddler station could move further north. That wasn't something that had been said before. That's a bit of a game changer. On top of that, there were some suggestions about parklands and so forth, which hadn't been part of the work that we'd done. And there were some, I won't say roadblocks, but strong views from the Renewal that they would probably not be that agreeable to us proceeding with zoning half their land for a northern parkland. So that led to a conversation about varying the Jensen brief, which I decided to do, because it makes sense that if they're doing a growth framework, they should also include some design principles to further develop the southern rural area work. On the proviso, we still engage with the community this financial year, which we said we would do. So that's something I decided to do as the acting CEO. And on top of that, we had further conversations with the Commission on the basis that if we're doing this collaborative exercise and we're expanding the Jensen brief, if you like, that we probably do need a structure plan which deals with the southern rural area, which brings Renewal and the Commission to the table, where they actually put their own money into this, not just Council. Because what happened was, in the meantime, the Commission had also said we're changing regional plans. So regional plans will be the pathway to code amendments in the future. So if you have a structure plan built into the regional plan, that means Council doesn't have to do code amendments itself, and it gives a much more streamlined approach and defines our agenda as opposed to everyone else's agenda. So having thought about all that, that's what we went to the Commission with. Yes, I did that. The Commission then wrote to Council, and we've advised you as a group that we think there should be something in the budget to allow a structure plan process to occur. That is the only way I think we'll ever get a northern parkland, and that's the only way we'll get an interurban break. And also it was on the basis that, given I'd already come to Council with at least 2 or 3 proponent-led code amendments, the discussion was we need to get some guidance from the Commission so we don't get basically overwhelmed by a whole range of speculative code amendments which we think would be better off being potentially incorporated into the structure planning we're doing. So that's why I've gone down the path I have. I have briefed the Council regularly as we've gone through this, and I think I've talked at least 3 to 5 times about it. So thank you.
Thanks. Another question? Yep.
I'm just on page, thank you, Andrew, yep, page 14 of 154. That's the attachments. This is just getting back to the actual numbers. In there, it talks about an extra 5,000 dwellings. Okay, that equates to 15,000 people. Okay, if we assume that our current population is 25,300, which is probably more, yet you add the 15, that takes you up to 39. That's what we had up there as our medium growth. So that just that one initiative actually takes us to medium growth. If you want high, it's another 4,000, 43. So I just want to be really clear on what sort of growth, how many houses are we actually looking at? Because the 5,000 that the government wants would actually get us to where medium growth is anyway, just like that.
Andrew?
Through the chair, I think that was covered to a degree by Jensen earlier. That 5,000 figure that the Commission's talked about is somewhat over both boundaries. That includes Blakeview land as well as land here, and also some of the Playford Alive land. When we talk about the projected growth, that 5,000 figure is across that northern corridor. It isn't specifically in southern rural areas. I would take the view that given you've got at least 1,500 more lots in Gawler East, which, as you know, has its own deeds and is zoned for development, that entails something in the order of about 4,000 residents. I would imagine that the number will be south of 5,000 lots in southern rural areas. We don't know the number, but I'm thinking it's a number that's probably well below that. But we have to do the work, but I would also envisage that it would be sweating out the capacity opportunities through the renewal land, with the idea that if we could do more on some of the renewal land, there'll be less of a demand or a reasonable expectation of growth in around Hillier, which I think should be rural, or around Dalkeith Road, which might be part of our inter-urban break. But I'm sort of jumping ahead as to where it might look in the end. But I think if the government does what it says it's going to do and moves the station north, that is what will drive more development on the corridor, and that's basically where renewal land is. So the more they develop, the less there's going to be a need, I think, to come up with more intensive growth in other areas, but we have to test that out.
So the wording in this report doesn't say, is confusing to me, but so we're saying that 5,000 is the dwellings we can expect to 2046, full stop. Is that it? Because that gets us to the medium growth, which historically, that is what happened in the property people talk about high growth, but it's never happened. It's always been medium. And I think we as a council have actually said we don't agree with the high growth scenario. We've always banked on the medium growth scenario.
Finally, I think you're right. In fact, the brief for Jensen is it's a medium growth projection. Our submission to GARP, to the discussion paper, was we felt the medium growth projection was more realistic, given historically we've never achieved the high growth scenario. It's a very high number. And I think Jensen are correct, which Michael McHugh and the team, which is, I guess you've got to show you've tested it out. It doesn't mean that's where council is comfortable at going. And whilst it might be a scenario, as could be the Commission's suggestion that, to develop on Hillier, in the Hillier area or along the Gawler River, just because it's a possibility doesn't mean it's an option we should actually pursue, but we need to test out why that's inappropriate. And I guess that's why we're doing that water analysis at the moment about water supply through Virginia or NACE, for example, to shore up Hillier, and that's something Chris Hannaford's working on. We need to do these design principles that Jensen's working on. It might come up with an idea that we don't want to provide as much retail expansion in the town centre because there's too many heritage constraints, and therefore that 16,000 square metres, maybe half of it is in the south. Maybe it's next to Aspire, given that Aspire and everyone else say there's not enough retail in their area. That's again the scenario work we've got to come back to you with, and then you can tell us what you agree with and what you don't, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you for that. Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, happy to support the motion. I think it's good news that we're able to work together with the Planning Commission. I think obviously we have our strongly held views, but when we clash with the state government, one of us has the power to override the other, and it's not us. So we do need to find a compromise that will work for us. And I think there's lots of exciting opportunities there. I think the power of working with the state government on your plans that you're excited about, I think is, showcased this week by Barossa, who managed to secure another huge grant. I think possibly a fully funded grant from the state government. Is it? Oh, it was half and half? Yeah. But another huge grant, because they had their pitch ready of what they wanted. You know, if all they had was their pitch of what they don't want, then they wouldn't have gotten any funding, you know. We need to not just have a pitch of, this is what we don't like. We need to have a pitch of, hey, can you know, we want this. We want to be able to do this. We want to be able to have a sporting precinct. Can you help us? Because it works with your plans, and I think that's a really exciting prospect.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Spot on, I think. Is there any further discussion? I'll go to Councillor Shanks first and then come back to Councillor Koch.
Thank you, Chair. I think it was an interesting point, and it didn't really resonate until Councillor Solomon pointed it out, but it does align with some of the budget discussions we've been having. You've heard me say we're running around putting out spot fires. This level of planning and strategic thinking has the ability to solve these little problems on a bigger scale organically, and I think that's not something to overlook. It is going to be only achievable if we actually deliver on the recommendations or versions of the recommendations once we get to the end of this journey. And the business cases that link to each one of those outcomes, we need to look at very closely, because, you know, we've got Jensen Plus in the room, and the other consultants and our staff and the like. And to be honest, Jensen Plus gave us a brilliant report years ago in how the precincts could look potentially in the southern rural area. Now, would that fit in modern day? Well, that's what we're redoing and testing. But, you know, non-activation, picking up on the point Councillor Davies pointed out, we can give a long list of what we want, of what we don't want. But until we've clearly identified what we're open for, we'll keep on getting these outcomes thrust at us, and we'll keep on running around with the fire extinguishers trying to put out these little spot fires. We're lacking our commercial development, our employment zones. But we also don't want proponent-led code amendments telling us where it's going to be. We need to map out our town, and we need to understand what opportunities are here today and moving into the next 10 years, the next 20 years and beyond. Because if we want to solve the problems of today and not just keep on repeating the same, then we need to stop doing the same. And these sorts of strategies that are the linkages throughout all our other strategies that we all know and love, but are lacking the connection on how to actually deliver on them, will keep on having us running around in circles. So I really look forward to seeing what organic solutions fall out of these. Personally, I'd love to just build on the modelling and looking at where our precincts are commercially and the mixes. I mean, we have a good example right now on Paxton Street. It's more of that industrial, trade-based, wholesaler sort of precinct. We've also got our main street, which is our retail cafe strip. We'd love to see better activated, and I don't disagree with Deputy Mayor about looking at what are our traffic opportunities there in making that more usable. And then we've got our Adelaide Road precinct with our consultancies and the like. We've got a bit of a bulky goods slash supermarket precinct there in Gawler Green, which works and also doesn't all at once, if that makes sense. I mean, if you're a local, you understand what that means. So what's next? Tiver Road, is that the next precinct where we leverage some opportunity on some bulky good mixed with other opportunities of commercial? Do we utilise the state government highways to have those destination shoppers come in with their trailers, do what you do when you go to Bunnings and turn around and get back to where they want to get to on the weekend and work in their own homes? Realistically, was a bulky good liquor outlet on the main street built into the church a good thing for traffic flow? All these questions and all these answers are when we look at this as a holistic map of our town. You've heard me call it the Gawler 42. I'm liking where we're evolving. I have mentioned that before. But until we start thinking about these things and changing our mindset, the happening to us model will just keep on going. So yeah, again, I look forward to positioning ourselves not to be ring-rooted around and turn into what I compare the Salisbury Main Street with Mawson Lakes coming online and what happened to Salisbury. I look at us having our own place of point of difference, what we can offer, what's our identity, and we take in and we invite the community members of the future, because we're out there preaching their community of interest, one way or another. So, yeah, this work sets us up to still be that supporting town of the greater north that we all know we are. And I even expand on, we support families coming from the Yorke Peninsula and the like, because of what we have here in Gawler, and geographically we're the closest to be able to offer the services we offer. So we need to build on that, but without that clear vision and being very vocal on what we don't want without providing what we do want, I think, yeah, we can get to the end of this process and end up with a nice professionally done document that make recommendations, but unless it starts linking to our long-term financial plans and we get on top of our mix of rates, yeah, we're going to find ourselves in the same position that I think Salisbury was there for a bit.
Thanks, Councillor Shanks. Councillor Kosh.
Look, it's going to be an interesting journey. It's interesting that the engagement that's happened so far, people have said they don't want massive township growth. They want open spaces maintained. They want protection of the rural lands, and they want the green belt. That's been something that's been advocated for years and years and years and years. I don't know, 30, 40 years. It has not changed, and that's the defining characteristic of the town, is that they stand up for what they want, and they don't like to be pushed around and imposed on because of somebody else's ideas or views or whatever. They actually do say, look, we are in Gawler, we've got a view, and we want that view understood, and we want it to be actioned on. They don't want people to roll over. They want people to listen to the community views and actually stand up for them. Sometimes I hear, we've got to give in, we've got to almost placate the government so we can get some little lolly over here. I think that's a dangerous way to go, because you're actually giving away everything which makes Gawler a distinct and unique town. The last thing you want is Gawler to be part of the Greater Adelaide area, and you will have, red roofs all the way from Narungnia, all the way down south, all the way to Roseworthy. There'll be no gap, there'll be nothing. You'll have some trinket of green space here and there. You'll have a little ribbon over here, and we'll call that, we'll call that an interurban break. But that will, in the end, just destroy the town. It's just like when you're talking 5,000 houses, you're talking about getting the town of Lyndoch and whacking it into Cuddler. That's what you're actually talking about. So if you want that, well, good luck to you, because that's not what I think the people of Gawler want. And I'll be standing up for what I know that people have said to me over and over and over again, and it comes through every single time in the community plan that's what they actually want. They don't want people to roll over. They want people to stand up for their views and maintain and create a really nice town. I don't think urban sprawl would make a nice town. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Is there any further discussion? No, I'll just add a couple of things and say, yeah, I think this is really some great work. I would like to point out, as Councillor Solomon did, about the joint concept structure plan and working with the Planning Commission. I think that's fantastic, and credit to Chris and his team on engaging with external stakeholders. And thank you again to the work of SMEC and Jensen Plus, and we look forward to seeing this progress forward. So, Councillor Solomon, did you want to close the debate?
Thank you, Chair. Just touching on a couple of points in there. You know, I want to start by saying some of that work which has been done with the state government, I think, is it's departed from what we've seen in the past, and I think it's actually been quite a good thing in the sense that maybe we might have a cynical little joke about the state government rolling over us whenever they want to, but to me what I'm seeing here is, for the first time, the state, in a long time, the state government coming and going, well, obviously you know your town best, so tell us what you would like incorporated into the GARP as part of that plan. So I think that, you know, what we see is, you know, it doesn't always have to just be us or them, us versus them. There can be mutual benefit, there can be mutual agreement on some of these things, and we don't necessarily get to mutual agreement by just digging in as soon as any suggestion crops up. You know, I think, you know, people of course do like their elected representatives to stand up for them, but more than that, they probably like results. Just, you know, and on that part of the southern rural areas in there, I mean, this is something where, you know, we haven't had a strategic vision for that particular area. You know, we've had the opportunity to since I was in Nappies, but we haven't. And, you know, we now have that opportunity where we've actually, you know, done the work looking at what is viable there. And I'm going to say something controversial here, but, you know, if we want a green belt, and that's what people are saying they want, then we should have a green belt. But what we have at the moment, I don't think is actually a green belt. I think is, you know, dilapidated infrastructure, a couple of horticulture businesses which have come about probably not because of what's available to them, but in spite of what's available to them there. And, you know, looking at things like water coming into that area is actually, you know, and how we get water there is actually really positive, because people are relying on expensive mains water for horticulture. If we want horticulture in Hillier, we need to do everything in our power to build the infrastructure to have it there. And we need to be realistic with what that looks like. I also think, you know, there's been some sentiment in the chamber for a long time that, you know, we shouldn't just be consulting with the people in Cudler about the southern rural area. And this is a perfect opportunity to ask the whole town what they think about that particular area of the town. So I like the way that we're going about this. I like that it's all been brought together. And, you know, to echo what I think a lot of people were saying in there, this is some of the small stuff that we do, the planning from the get-go that we do to ensure that we're not putting out spot fires in the future. If we get the small things done right now, then we don't need to be putting out those spot fires in the future. And so I'm really optimistic about this plan, and, you know, obviously there'll be differences of opinion once community consultation occurs, but I'm looking forward to the process.
Thanks, Councillor Solomon. The debate is closed. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you, members. That was a very good but lengthy discussion, so I think we might take a 10-minute break, members, and we'll return at 9:20. Thank you. should have thought about chairing the meeting before I scoffed down a biscuit. Sorry, everyone. All right, thank you, everyone. We'll resume the meeting. We are now up to item 8.2, Schomberg Drive Speed Limit Review. We've got Richard here Richard, would you like to come up to the lectern initially? Asked Richard if he could give us a little bit of a rundown on where we've gotten to till this point, and then if there's any questions from members, we'll ask Richard from there. So, Richard, if you're happy to give us a brief presentation about how you've arrived to this report, that would be great.
No problems. Thank you, Councillor White. Look, I guess a lot of people, everyone's pretty familiar with some of the background behind this road being built and the previous speed limit assessments that were undertaken for Schomberg Drive. So I'm not going to go too much into that, just as a bit of an introduction, but Schomberg Drive itself is, I guess, still a touchy point within the community regarding the existing speed limit. In terms of obviously dealing with it as a traffic matter, that's something that comes up almost on a weekly basis. And obviously from a strategic perspective, there's an important function around the long-term use of Schomberg Drive as a connection to Gawler East and potentially Concordia. I suppose hence the need to revisit the speed limit assessment for Schomberg Drive. In addition to that, there's been a lot more data that's been collected since then. What we've done ourselves. We've done quite extensive engagement with the Department for Infrastructure and Transport, as well as SAPOL, before being in this position, I guess, to speak to you now about the matter. But I'm sure you've all read the report, so I'm more than happy to take any questions that you might have about the report.
No worries. Councillor Koch and then Mayor Redman.
Thanks, Chair. Through you, I've got a couple of questions. Reading the first report, the Wahlberg report, it said that it was designed for 50 k's, and people would normally go 60, so that was the issue. Then when I read the second report, it says, it says in the conclusion, it says the Schomberg, a review of the alignment characteristics of Schomberg Drive has found it will generally meet the requirements to operate at 60 kilometres an hour. I don't get a lot of confidence when someone says generally meet. So could you give us a comment on that, whether that's a definitive, yes it can, or whether yes it may generally? What does that actually mean?
Through the Chair. So in terms of the original WGA assessment, they made their assessment based on the Ausroads guides, and some of the elements that they picked up was around the curvature of the road in terms of the horizontal alignment, and sight lines, particularly at crests and bends. The new assessment that we've done has done a thorough review of the WGA assessment. It doesn't necessarily critique that the assessment that they did was wrong in terms of the guidelines that they looked at, but I suppose the consultants that we engaged identified that there were some other aspects within the Ausroads guidelines that perhaps weren't looked at as part of this assessment. So that probably more generally sort of answers that question in terms of the generality. Like I said, there's aspects that do meet the design, but there's other elements that there are still some shortcomings, but the new report has investigated ways in which that those risks can be mitigated, because the outstanding matter is that people are travelling at an 85th percentile speed of about 70 k's per hour on the road, which is 20 k's above what the signposted speed limit is. The data, the crash data that's occurred on the road has been extremely low, which actually suggests that despite the fact that people are going at a higher speed, the road is operating relatively safe as of now. So it's important to distinguish that the new report also considers a lot of environmental factors that the old one didn't and probably couldn't at the time, because it was only produced about a couple of months after it was opened. So we have a lot. So that, I suppose to conclude, there's a lot more information in this new report that I suppose we didn't have the opportunity to get when the previous one was prepared.
Follow up? Yeah.
The question is about frangibility. And, for example, on Ryde Street, we changed the speed limit there so we could put the trees in. Okay, we dropped it down to, I think, 60 k's, then we planted trees, that's fine. On Schomberg Drive, there's trees in the median strip and there's a rollover curb. I'm concerned about 50, that must be right. It must be right, the fact that those trees aren't frangible. So therefore, I'm just concerned at 60 or 70 k's an hour, what's the relationship between those trees, the sewerage pipe and the embankments, which are all not frangible? You know, what's the relationship there? Is it, you know, are we allowed to actually have cars travelling at 70 k's, you know, 2.5 metres away from a tree, basically?
Through the chair, so in terms of, there is an actual guideline around the assessment of speed limits in relation to trees, and in the case of Ryde Street, the speed limit there was 80 k's per hour, which is considered a high speed road. Generally where there's a distinguishment is between a 60 kilometre per hour speed limit and a 70 kilometre per hour speed limit. So under a 60 kilometre per hour speed limit, trees are still permitted to be I twisted my words there. Trees are still permitted to be planted within, I guess, a safe roadside environment as you do for 50 k's per hour. I'm happy to provide, I guess, that document offline if you wanted to see the reference to that. But that was something, I suppose, that we flagged to, I guess, the consultant as well, even before we commissioned the assessment.
But that wasn't mentioned in their report. The ETA report didn't talk about frangible items in the carriageway. So I'm just wondering, I'm just concerned that, you know, if at 60 k's with a tree 1.5 metres away, whether that's appropriate or not, and whether that's safe. I wouldn't have thought it, you know, it's, yeah. At 50 it's probably safe, but at 60 potentially, I don't know.
Through the chair, so I'm pretty familiar with the tree-side environment guidelines that have been put forward by the state government. I'm happy to take that on notice, and I can follow that up with ETA to get a position on that. But based on my interpretation of that guideline, trees are permitted within that environment, and when they look at a road safety perspective, they looked at a lot of aspects that I guess covered the whole assessment. But I can take that on notice and get back to you formally on that one.
Thanks, Richard. That'd be great. Mayor Redman.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I walk that road twice a week. I start from Phillips Avenue, your road, and we walk through the commercial centre and then all the way to One Tree Hill and then back again. So there's at least 25 people that walk that road in the mornings and across the day. If you put a school there in the quarry, there will be children walking along the pedestrian or the footpath. So my question is, the only long-term measure identified was emergency stopping bays. These are more complicated to implement and would require further liaison with Department for Infrastructure and Transport as the adjoining landowner. So where are the emergency stopping bays going to be? There's probably only 2 people that Hoon Drive on the bridge, and I can see the black marks all over the road. However, there's 1 or 2 cars. So where are the emergency stopping bays going to be, and will there be dog legs with the footpath, and how will you manage that?
Richard.
Through the chair, so Mayor Redman, that's a really excellent question. And I guess I can't answer with a definitive answer tonight, so I will take that on notice. But I guess what I can say is that because it's quite a complicated matter, that's why I stressed that it's important that we discuss this further with the department, because it's a significant change. Within the report itself that ETA prepared, they did suggest an interim or short-term measure that could be implemented, which is simply the provision of providing driveway crossovers at a number of locations. Again, the exact locations would need to be determined at detailed design. They've nominated 2 sections within, one on each side between Potts Road and Gawler One Tree Hill Road, and they've suggested 3 or 6 spots, 3 on each side, between the Springwood entrance and Gawler One Tree Hill Road on the other side. I suppose we really wanted to try and come up with a short-term solution because the implementation of such a thing, again, requires a lot more work and a lot more consideration. I guess hopefully that answers the question for now, but it is something that we're looking into.
When will we have the answer?
Through the chair, I can't confirm that tonight. I guess what I'm stressing is that we focus more on the short-term outcomes because those are the things that can be more readily or easily delivered. But those are some of the things we can work on and I suppose get an answer to within the coming months.
Thank you.
There's 5 to 6 trees that are dead also, I noticed, on Monday morning.
I might just defer to Wendy Mayer. She might be able to provide a further response.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. I think that longer-term emergency stopping bay design, that will have to take into consideration the continuity of the footpath access because obviously there's a whole heap of extra development to go in and around the Link Road. So that would be one of the fundamental constraints to that design process. And that conversation that we need to have with DIT to come to the point of furthering what is possible is where, I guess full-time emergency stopping bays versus the ability to use a short-term driveway crossover arrangement and how long we could do that for. That's all the stuff we've got to discuss with them, but we wanted to let the chamber know that this is at least where we're getting to and I guess understand where the support is for us, pursuing this before we even start to go into those more detailed discussions. No. I think so. The short-term measures would continue to allow pedestrian access, basically as it is now, but the long-term solution would still be constrained to make sure that access was enabled. But we don't know exactly what it would be configured like. That's what we don't know yet. But pedestrians 100% will continue, and that access along the Link Road will definitely continue to be an important aspect. And again, especially because it's not just the people who are using it now, it's the next 1,200 houses and all those residents and their families who are going to want to use it too. Yeah, it's more to saying that my response is more to highlight the importance that we'll put on that in those next investigations. And yes, trees, replacement trees, it's coming back into tree planting season, so we're on it. Yeah.
I'm going to go to Richard. Richard?
Sorry, just to further emphasise on Wendy's point, I think it's important to understand why emergency bays were put in as a recommendation in the first place. Part of the long-term safety and enforcement of a higher speed limit on Schomburg Drive is actually having SAPOL being in a position where they can be able to monitor it and enforce the speed limit, which they currently can't do at the moment because there's no locations for them to safely, one, pull over themselves and set up, or two, pull someone else over unless they follow them 4 kilometres down the road to the end of the street. So ultimately that aspect of it is something that is warranted irrespective of the speed limit. And certainly the footpath connectivity is an important aspect of that, and it's something that we looked at. There's no intention of severing the footpath to provide an emergency stopping bay. The third thing also is that if you need to undertake maintenance or any sort of roadworks, where's the opportunity to be able to pull over or divert traffic? So there's a lot of other factors behind, I guess, why that recommendation was put in the report.
Thanks, Richard. Is there any further questions specifically for Richard? Councillor Solomon and Shanks.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Through the Chair, probably to Richard. Just in relation to the number of people who are going over the speed limit currently, I guess what's the safety implication of that? Is that is that a concern that we have, that so many people are driving at inconsistent speeds and the pedestrians are there, or is it sort of negligible in its effect?
Through the chair, so that's a very good question. I think overall the problem is that the speed limit doesn't reflect the environment in which people are driving in. Pedestrians do use the footpaths and they do have a separated path. But I suppose there's also the element that there's other roads.
Mayor, can we just stop the commentary and just let Richard speak one at a time? Thank you.
Yeah. There's also existing roads that we have that are 60 k's an hour that have footpaths on the side as well. So I guess pedestrian safety is an aspect that we looked into as part of the study.
Thank you. Councillor Shanks, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You touched on, I think we were talking about Rod Street, the 80 kilometres being categorised as a high-speed road. Could I just get a bit of clarity around the categories? Are 50 and 60 kilometres in the same category, or is there a separate category for either, or does it go 80 high speed above? Just a little bit of clarity around that one.
Through the chair, so the lower and high speed limit is more reflective of the trees and roadside environment diagram. And there's very subtle differences between 50 and 60, if not identical, when it comes to street side trees as it relates to the road. However, the guidance beyond 60 km/h speed limit in that guideline is a lot more onerous once you get beyond 70 km/h or 70 and above.
Thank you. Councillor Lorna.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you, Chair. I just want to confirm here so I'm clear that we're talking about a 2.7 kilometre stretch of that road, correct?
Yes, that is correct. So the original assessment undertaken by WGA looked at the full section of road between Potts Road and Carlton Road, which includes Malama Way. So this section is 2.7 kilometres, which looks from Potts Road through to the Springwood entrance, which is about a kilometre away from where the new signals are being installed at Schomburg Drive and Malama Way.
Cool, thank you. Just to follow up then, we're looking going from 50 to 60 kilometres, which in effect is about 45 seconds travel time, which in effect is about $200,000.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes, that's right.
I don't know if that's a question or a statement, but hey.
Thanks, Councillor Lorna. Councillor Sample, you have a question?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Richard, were you aware of the stoplights going in that have just been erected up there? Because people they've got used to this stupid 50 kilometres an hour thing, but now with the stoplights, people are saying to me, we're now going to find a complete alternate route because the stoplights that have just been erected up there are just going to make that crossing much longer to get through. So I'm just wondering if you know of that, and I ask councillors to vote this down. This is $200,000 we can save tonight. Vote it down.
I might go to Wendy to answer that.
So through the chair, regarding the traffic lights, so that intersection and the upgrade that's required has been part of the traffic interventions for the Springwood development effectively since it was first being master planned. And we need to understand that Springwood is a development and it's going in stages, and as you develop more stages and you have more people, your road network is going to expand and change, and you have to implement traffic interventions that ultimately keep people safe. Yes, having a set of traffic lights there is probably going to annoy some people right now, but once you actually get the next section of road connected into Balmoral Road and you've got more people using that section, and you've got a four-way intersection right by a shopping district and not far up the road from a school, you understand the importance, safety-wise, of having a managed signal set there. Change is hard in an urban environment, but it is a development and it is going to continue to grow and change. In all honesty, I think I'll put a personal perspective on this rather than a professional one for a second. The speed that the cars are coming around that corner, as if you're trying to turn into that shopping centre, is actually quite terrifying, and I'm quite delighted there's going to be some traffic lights to actually manage that. It's actually a safety concern right now. So people are going to have all different personal opinions on that. I think ultimately we need to look at the big picture, and I appreciate the comment that Councillor Lorna made that, you know, it's like $190,000 for 45 seconds. But you times that 45 seconds by the 10,000 vehicles that are supposed to use that road ultimately a day, and that by 365 days a year, and that by however long they're going to live there, and the value proposition starts to change when you look at that compared to the investment. And we don't know 100% what that investment's going to be yet as well, and obviously we'd be looking for the lowest cost investment to try and achieve not what just we maintain, but again, what the constant commentary we get in from the public about that road being inappropriately speed limited at the moment. I'm sorry, Councillor Sample, I've forgotten your second part of your question now. Traffic lights, and there was another one, but I'm sorry, I've forgotten. If you can remember, okay. I'll come back to it.
That's okay. Thanks, Wendy. Andrew?
Thank you, through the chair. I think it's fair to say the report we're providing tonight isn't going to be comfortable to all parties, and we'll ask you some challenging things. But there's a few things I suppose I should mention, and Richard can clarify if I've got it wrong. But we're not talking about the whole length of the road being speed zone changed. It's the section below the quarry site where the school will be at some point in time, if they ever secure a school to go in there. So it's that lower section through to the end point. In terms of the interventions, and Richard can confirm this one, those interventions will be required regardless of whether the speed zone increases or not. So when people say, yes, you're increasing this, reducing travel time by 45 seconds, that's not quite what we're talking about. Those interventions, whenever they occur, and I think the intended parking and whatever else will be potentially quite a few years away, and it'll be budget dependent. But ultimately that will be required whether you increase the speed from 50 to 60 or not. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes, to that aspect, but I suppose the second thing is like I was inferring earlier, is that that's a broader discussion with the Department of Infrastructure and Transport. So it shouldn't solely be on council. Sure. I suppose that's why we're suggesting it needs to be that broader level discussion.
My point being, it's not a case of increase the speed, therefore incur the cost. That cost has been a deferred item for many years, and if you look at the file, which I have, there's been a history of deferred items on that road for a long time, and that includes sewer pipelines, it includes landscaping, which ultimately council installed, which didn't charge the developers within the estate. There's been a range of things, and this is just another one. And I guess finally, the other comment I would make would be about a clear road hierarchy. So if you think back to what we discussed earlier about the integrated transport plan, ultimately, we do feel as a council administration that we are trying to sweat the infrastructure. We had $60 million of investment by state government in a road which was designed to reduce traffic volumes on Murray Street. If you end up with a speed zoning the same as High Street next door here, or the same as Calton Road, the signal you're sending out, which is that we don't really care which road you take because ultimately it's up to you, isn't quite what the road hierarchy is about. The hierarchy ultimately is about getting traffic out of this town and to use that link road as a key arterial or key connector. You've got to be careful with the language about collectors versus arterial roads, I know that. But ultimately, this road should be a higher speed zone than Calton Road, and that's the only way, ultimately, with the growth that's going to occur, we're going to avoid all that traffic from, say, Gawler East and more prominently from Concordia using that other road network. So that's why we brought it to you. We didn't expect you to be ecstatic about the fact that there'll be some costs at some point in time, but as I said, those costs link back to things which have been deferred for a long time, and it's not rooted to the speed zone.
Richard, just a question from me. In regards to a number of the safety upgrades, it's obviously highlighted that these are not necessarily due to the speed limit increase. I guess my question is, why weren't they implemented when the road was constructed initially?
Through the chair, look, that's a great question. I guess me as a staff member, I wasn't here at the time, so I can't speak, I suppose, on what what the process was and the decisions that were made. I suppose when we spoke with SAPOL as well in regard to that matter, and that was something that they did sort of flag as well as part of this.
So it's not necessarily a requirement. It's a safety. There's safety upgrades, but they're not requirements that we're obviously legally required.
Maybe just to, I guess, clarify. I guess within that report, there were ultimately they undertook a road safety audit of the whole road. So as an independent engineer, they're going to look at the road overall as a function, and I suppose their job is to identify, what are the risks, what are the shortcomings, what are the limitations, and I suppose you can apply that logic and rhetoric to a lot of existing roads, and you'll probably identify and come up with the same things, or like similar problems, or more problems in some cases, or less problems in other cases. So I think that's an important point to distinguish tonight. And I guess the next element is that the list of items that were identified there was all the I suppose risks or non-compliances that they picked up. So I suppose the next part of the conversation is then going to be, okay, what is the most important aspect to deal with the speed limit itself, and what are some of those other things that are more nice to haves, like, for example, like a median along the bridge because of hoon driving, because I suppose hoon driving could be a problem that occurs elsewhere through the council. So I suppose you've got to look at that relative level of risk as well. So the report that was put out by ETA just identifies all the risks, and I guess I can't overstep someone's opinion. If someone provides a report, you can ask questions about why they put that recommendation in, but I can't rewrite their recommendations for them.
That's okay, thank you. Some more questions? No. Okay, is there any more questions explicitly before we get into the debate, members? No, thank you, Richard, for the presentation answering questions. I have had a recommendation, members, from Andrew, potentially to adjust the officer's recommendation that points 4 and 5 are removed, but basically a further report is to come after the engagement. I think the motion is kind of trying to do two things at once, in my view. It's seeking to endorse council staff to engage with external stakeholders, and then also notes the high-level cost estimate, giving in principle support right now. I think what Andrew is suggesting, and I might be on board with this, is to actually endorse the engagement externally, and then from that see where the figures sit, come back to the IES with some more precise numbers of what the cost estimates would be for the short and potentially long-term solutions, but that might be further on. So that's a proposal. Members, would anyone like to move that way, or what are we thinking? I'm just going to go to the Deputy Mayor first, Councillor Hennessy, just because he had his hand up first.
Yeah, look, I'm happy to move that way for now. I think the issues have gotten a little confused. I think people associate the costs with the increase in the speed limit and not a separate independent audit that happened. So I'm happy to just move 1, 2 and 3 for now. And is it a separate motion, or do we just, as the motion say, part of the motion say we defer?
If you're the mover, you're happy to move whichever way, but the suggestion was that points 4 and 5 are merged or changed, that a report be provided at a...
4 and 5 will be deleted, it would be further report back to council.
Okay.
That wouldn't need to be a motion tonight, then?
That'd have to be agreed to vary the recommendation.
Yeah,
okay.
Well, we don't have a mover yet, so we can move whatever motion. I'm happy to move a motion that gets rid of point 4 and 5 and says, come back with a report on those issues.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move that way. Nikita, if you're happy to adjust, we're going to delete points 4 and 5 at this stage, and add a point 4 that instead says, Deputy Mayor, would you like to, you're moving?
Let's see, that staff provide a report on whatever, I don't know, Andrew, if you've got the best words there.
So we're handballing around the wordsmithing, but...
Yeah, that staff provide a further report on engagement findings for council's further consideration.
Yep.
Something fairly generic like that, without any commitment either way on costs. That might be safest.
Would we like it to come back to an IES committee So we might change that to for IES committee's consideration.
Yeah, a report to the IES or, yeah.
Thank
for
you.
IES consideration, yeah.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. You happy with that as it sits? Would you
Yeah.
like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, look, I think, I hope everyone can support this motion. All the controversial parts with the costs have been taken out of it. This is basically saying, let's continue to engage on this pivotal road. As our CEO mentioned, this is a road that was designed for the purpose of what we had like 2 hours of discussion for earlier, talking about what are we going to do about the fact that cars are coming through our main street that aren't there to shop at our main street, etc. You know, this is pivotal road infrastructure and it's not working, and everyone's driving 20 kilometres over the speed limit, and the ones that aren't, I'm sure, feel quite awkward having to deal with it, especially if their licence is not full yet. You know, I think this is something that we need to sort out. It's unfortunate that initially, whatever happens initially, that's before my time as well on the council, these decisions. It's very clear that something needs to be done. The problems are so obvious that everyone's ignoring the speed limit. And so I'm happy to have further discussions.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Hennessy, I know you had your hand up before. Did you want to second this or...
Yeah, I am happy to second it, and I'm happy at this stage for 4 and 5 to come out. But I think in engaging with the stakeholders, we need to be very upfront that whatever we do, whether they be for good reasons, will have a cost to council. At a time that we have said time and time again, and we continue to tell our community, that we're in a challenging budgetary situation. So a $16 million road continues to give us headaches and it continues to cost. I just think that would be wise to do, because I think in engaging with, for example, the residents and the businesses up there, you raise their expectation that this will happen. And that's fair, but I think we need to be cautious and say this may happen and it will come with additional costs. Councillor Lorna pinched my words. I mean, seriously, it's about choices as well. However, I am swayed by what the acting CEO said and making this a priority road. So I'm happy on that basis and with those worries to second the motion.
Thanks, Councillor Hennessy. Any discussion? Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to speak in support of the motion. I think it's something which is brought up, I know, by a lot of members in the community. It's a road I've only driven on a couple of times because I personally avoid it like the plague. It's an interesting one. Obviously, we've heard tonight, and we have in the report, that a lot of people are actually going above that 85th percentile. They are going 65, 70 down that road, and you know, I've been going down there riding my brakes because it's you know, at some points it doesn't. The environment, I think, as Richard said as well, is not necessarily conducive to encouraging the kind of speed that people should be going at. In fact, I've had some people so far, or so close behind me, and felt like saying, you know, open the boot, jump on in. But that being said, there is a safety concern, which I acknowledge. You know, we do, I think all in this chamber care about safety. And we want to ensure that safety is a priority. When we have people, a high number of people driving at 60, 70 on a road which is designed for 50, and we have pedestrians walking there, I'm not sure that's necessarily a safe environment either. And, you know, we need to find that balance. In my view, we need to find that balance in there somewhere where there's a speed limit which is actually conducive to the, you know, well, which is actually appropriate for the environment that people find themselves driving in, so that they're more likely to do that. Because if you're, if the environment is, you know, 70, encourages you to do 70, and the speed limit is 50, you're more likely to just go 70. If the environment is 60, the environment encourages 70 and the speed limit's 60, you're more likely to just drop down that tiny little bit and accept that. So I think, there needs to be some change and some investigation in here, and so I'll be supporting the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Solomon. Just a point of clarification too, which was outlined in the report, is that the road was built to 60 km/h specifications, but the general guidelines when opening new roads is that you open at 10 km/h less than it is built for. So the road in its current state was initially designed for 60 km/h. Okay, Councillor Koch.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I'll be voting against this. I can't endorse the findings of the investigation of ETA. I find them not very conclusive. I don't have a lot of confidence in it. The issue we have is we have actually a sub-arterial traffic route. That's what we've got, sub-arterial traffic route, and that's referenced in the original report. It's not an arterial route, that's what it is. It was designed to provide access to an urban area, okay? At the moment, it looks like a rural road, and that's when we have visual cues, and that's what is affecting the speed of people people driving. They see it as a rural road, and then psychologically, I suppose, I'm not a psychologist, but I assume people go, well, if it's rural, therefore it must be designed for a higher speed. I think that's what's in people's minds. So they think, well, I've got to drive, because it's rural, I can drive faster, so they do. So it's designed for 60. It was posted at 50 because they know that people are going to drive faster. They just know that. So that's a little buffer there within the system, safety buffer. So you say 50, you know they're going to go a little bit quicker, potentially 60, it's still safe. If you make it at 60, people will go faster to say 70 because the visual cue is it is a rural road, so they will go faster. Then you've got issues because then you've got the horizontal, the vertical, all those K whatevers, all those things come into play, and that puts people at risk, at serious risk. Now, we've just heard tonight that there's not much difference between 50 and 60 km/h when you talk about trees in the carriageway. We're told that. That's fine. But once you go over 60, there is an issue. We will have vehicles travelling at 70 km/h with trees which are unfrangible, means that they don't yield when you hit them. People potentially driving at 70 or plus. That is a serious risk, in my opinion. If you look at the original report, it actually flags that as an issue. If somebody has an accident on that road going, and there's an issue around whether we agreed to or we allowed them to go faster than the design of the road, there could be a comeback on council that we've actually allowed people to drive at a higher speed because we know that if we sign it at 60, we know they'll go faster than 60 because of the visual cues. We know that now. So we could be liable to issues down the track because the road was never built for, to be a whatever road. It was built as like an urban road, as a collector road for those urban areas. I mean, there's a certain amount of cars that go down there. I can't remember quite off the top of my head now, but eventually there'll be 100,000 cars going down there because they will all come into there because that'll be all developed. And then the visual cue then will be, oh yes, it's an urban road, we can drive at 50. And that's the only issue. We're trying to solve a problem because there isn't a problem, because all you need to say to people is, no, it's designed as an urban road. It's designed as a sub-arterial traffic route. That's all you have to say. And I tell people over and over and over again that it is designed for that. It is not a rural road. It's not a collector road. And the people go, oh, okay, that's fine. But that's the reality. I mean, I drive on that road all the time. I stay at the speed limit. That's fine. I find it much easier to drive that road than come into town and go back out. I mean, to think that people would consciously, coming from Williamstown, consciously drive through the middle of town instead of taking that road, I find it hard to believe, really. And then when the Balmoral Road connection is made, I think people will just go, it'll just naturally flow through. So I won't be supporting this because I'm not happy with the report by ETA. I don't think it's very thorough. It said it generally fits the bill. I mean, that's a pretty sad comment. And I think if people just accept that it is a sub-arterial traffic route and drive accordingly. So I won't be supporting this. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Koch. Councillor Lorna.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really in two minds with this at the moment, but I'm probably more swaying now that we've removed the actual dollar figures to it to go with the status quo. Look, in my honest opinion, if we had the opportunity, we should be reviewing the whole road and bringing it back to 80 to what it really looks like it should be, as I guess what Councillor Koch is saying there. That's kind of sort of what he's saying, but not really. But most people out there are going to be doing those speeds and that sort of thing anyway. So if it's going to be an arterial route to get people in and out of Gawler and out and around through the outskirts, then it really should be made as such. But understand that there's an astronomical amount of money involved in having to do that, and it's ripping the whole thing up and starting again. So I take on board what Wendy had also said there about adding up all my figures and that sort of stuff, and it is probably a lot of traffic use to going in there to make this actually move through. But I'm also very aware of Sharon's bin being empty of dollars to be able to actually pull out and put in there. One thing I do have, if we're putting 200,000 back into this, I'm assuming that's on a 10-year depreciation thing. That'd be roughly around 20 grand a year extra that's going to go back into depreciation. Question, Sharon? Maybe? Sorry. Probably less than that, because it's probably 100 years off. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Okay. Cool. So, look, realistically, I probably will support this at the moment. I would like to see it come back a little bit more and see what more we've got going with it from that final decision. So, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Shanks.
Yeah, look, thank you. Interesting discussions. The reality is, I don't disagree with Councillor Koch's comments because we're currently paying off some of my wife's speeding fines who have probably the same psychological approach to speed signs. That's not to say that those fines don't exist because the law has been broken. Putting everything else aside and all being equal, I think logic needs to prevail here because realistically the Gawler East Link Road was the broader, bigger picture and one part of the linkage that we do need to maintain to the level that gets it used in our bigger picture thinking. I think Deputy Mayor touched on it quite well in relation to what that looks like in regards to your integrated traffic solutions that we need to be looking at. And if we don't, those relationships and why that major infrastructure was delivered in the first place doesn't get used to its full potential. And also the ability to connect to a DIT road is something that's very attractive coming online when we talk about the Concordia development, how that works. Where are we sending trucks down if we're not going to send them down our main street? How does that look and the like? The reality is that we have clocked data to say that people are using that road at 70 plus right now, whether it's speed signed at 50 or 60. I don't agree with the sentiment that a speed sign is, well, you can go 10 kilometres more than that. That's acceptable because my bank account is showing that with the laws that have been broken by my lovely wife. And if we don't keep on investing in unpacking the solutions that may be here, then we're not setting ourselves up to be able to look at that holistic approach on what we want. Imagine if we do Deputy Mayor's idea and shut down the main street, and then we've got Schoenberg Drive and the Gawler Link Road banked up with a school at the top end, and the links aren't there because it's not to the level that it needs to be to get the data to be able to provide the business case to lobby state government to have those linkages that we all want, because realistically we want to get to a point where we ease a little bit of that traffic flow on our main street. We have alternative options for the pig trucks driving down through the centre of our town. So I think we owe it to our ratepayers to constantly keep on looking at this and show innovative ways on how we can potentially provide some solutions. And do we need to scrutinise those costs when they come through? Absolutely. Absolutely. Do we prioritise this in one budget cycle over traffic interventions on any other street that we talk about in the chamber? That's a conversation to have when we've got the business cases equally all lined up and we choose which ones we prioritise at that time. But giving up on all this work, I think, does just justice to the consultants that we eagerly pay to come in and advise and say, hey, look, this might be worthy looking at, but then stop looking at. So I'm happy to support where we sit, with the caveat that we all need to agree we look at the spends when we get there, but we all know we're a while off that yet.
Thanks, Councillor Shanks. Just a few comments from me. Yeah, when I speak to members of the community, the three biggest things that they tell me that they want changed is their rates to go down, better parking in the main street, and that damn speed limit on that road. So this is an important community issue, whether we like it or not. But then I'm also in two minds because what we're looking at is 60 kilometres an hour, and I can already hear the voices going, what? Only 60? Come on, I thought it could have been 70 or 80. But I think looking deeper and having these discussions, it shows the reasons to how we got here and the steps forward, which is our responsibility to convey that information to our community, as many of us are already doing. I think it is disappointing that when the road was initially built, there was a number of these safety features that weren't included. And I mean, from a community perspective, the road isn't really a good road, to be perfectly honest, in my opinion. The gutters are really steep, it feels really dangerous. I always wonder how an emergency service vehicle could overtake if your car breaks down, if you need to pull over. Like, it's actually not a good road, in my humble opinion, not as a road engineer, but just as a road user. So to see, but rather than dwell in the past and go, okay, let's not worry too much about how we got here, let's just look at our way forward. I can see both scenarios that have been discussed in the chamber tonight, as in, yes, the community said this is a big issue, we've got an opportunity, let's go down those discussions, but also keeping in mind that, for a 10 kilometre hour speed limit, we've got quite a big cost, as Councillor Lorna said. I can see both sides of the story for that. But from my point of view, I think this is quite a good compromise to go, in principle, we're happy with the sentiment, but we want to go out and collect more information, and we understand there is going to be some costs associated with this if this is what we want to do moving forward. However, I guess I'd urge members to think, at the end of the day, it's about, do we think that cost is worth it to the community? And that is a discussion later to come. But at the moment, I'm very happy to support moving forward with the discussions and seeing what those figures will be, as long as I think all members are on board with conveying that to our community and saying, hey, look, we are moving forward in this space. We've just got a little bit more to do first. And I want to also thank staff for their assistance in progressing this forward, because this has been an ongoing issue, and having maybe a fresh set of eyes and a new perspective on it has seemed to help drastically. So thank you, staff. Councillor Deputy Mayor Davies, are you happy to close the debate?
Yeah, just briefly, look, I think there's been some good discussion. I think I agree with Councillor Koch that it does look like a road where you should be able to drive faster. not sure how to, best address. I mean, you could always make it 25 and, I don't know, give them something, give them a reason to make it 25, like animatronic pirates along the side of the road or something, and people can go down, and then it can be a tourist destination. But you know, otherwise, I think the speed, you know, I think is something that, you know, in terms of whenever we're talking about these things, we talk about community priorities, and yeah, like many of you, I've heard this one as a priority many times. Not only this, but the priorities around our main street and all this other stuff, the road network, are some of the priorities that we heard earlier in this meeting. So I do think it's worthwhile. And yeah, look, this is not, as mentioned at the start, this is not, those 2 points were taken out of it. We're not dealing with approving any budgets right now, but we are acknowledging it as a priority problem that we would like to continue working on how to fix.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Closing the main street, making the Link Road a roller coaster. I think you've got plenty of ideas to offer. I look forward to hearing the next one. The debate is closed. I'll put the motion that is on the screen now up. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against, it's carried. Division. Councillor Solomon has called a division. Members in favour, could you please stand? Members against, could you sit? Oh, this is confusing. So the members in favour are Councillor Lorna, Deputy Mayor Davies, Councillor Hughes, Councillor Shanks, Councillor Solomon, Councillor Hennessy, Mayor Redman and myself. Members against are Councillor Kosh and Councillor Samble. The motion's carried. Thank you. Councillor Hennessy.
Yes, can I, very much aware that we've still got 4 items, can I make a motion that we extend the timeline?
You most
of the
certainly
meeting?
can. That's moved by Councillor Hennessy, seconded by Councillor Lorna, that we extend the meeting to 11 p.m. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Okay, item 8.3, street naming. Requests for new street names and for consultation for council's street name register. Deputy Mayor Davies.
Yeah, so firstly, I did some Googling and I found Jack Clark, John Clark as was his official name on the Parliament website, and it doesn't have an E. So I'd just like to get that change adjusted.
We might just ask Nikita to fix that in the minutes, that Clark without an E. Thank you.
And yeah, sorry, can we see that's the previous item.
Just down the other way. Thanks, Nikita.
Yeah, because there were some suggestions of, I think, 3 and 4 could be combined into one item because we're approving it as both a street name and the public spaces. And 1 and 2, I guess, I'll test out approving Jack Clark for both street names and public spaces, but not Clark for street name. We already have a Clark Road. I hear about it a lot from people who are upset about potholes.
Okay, so Deputy Mayor Davies, you're happy to move that way.
So to have Jack Clark as on the street name register and the public spaces register, and to have Crome and Meredith Crome, but not Clark to be added.
So just remove or Clark in point 1, is that what you're after?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we can make further adjustments, but that basically says it's...
but you want to adopt the proposed
yeah,
inclusion.
So
Sorry,
we're adopting Jack Clark
sorry, Nikita.
to the street name register.
Removing or Clark like you just had, and then changing refuses to adopts. Is that what you're after, Deputy Mayor?
Yep. Yeah, look, I think the full, so just to speak to it, I think the Crome and Meredith Crome, I think is uncontroversial. I don't think we have any conflicts that would cause those to be an issue. Yeah, Clark, I think there's an argument that, you know, you could say Clark is too close to Jack Clark, but I think that's a pretty clear difference if you're talking to an ambulance or something and you say Jack Clark Avenue or something, that's understood to be a different road. So I don't see that as a potential conflict really, but if you disagree, you feel free to mention it and we can go back to a second version of the motion, but I'm happy to put this forward as a test.
Councillor Solomon.
Just quickly, just as a suggestion, there's still part of the motion which I think is inconsistent there, which is being limited to public spaces. If it's amenable to the mover, can we change that to with a preference for public spaces? Yeah. Is that, if that's amenable to the mover? Yeah, I'm fine with that. So that it reflects that we accept them for both, but with a preference for public spaces as opposed to streets. Yeah. Is that?
Yeah, no, that would be fine. I think, yeah, honestly, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 could probably be merged with each other, but if rather than fiddle over it now for 15 minutes, I'm happy to just just say that we would prefer it for public spaces, but we will add it to the street name register also as an option.
Okay, no worries. Now, I will just mention too that in his deputation, Mr. Piccolo did mention about having Meredith Crome as a street name as well, I believe, if I remember correctly. Just something to consider. You're moving this, so your choice, but that was something that he did mention as well. Yeah, yeah, we can change point 3 to say adopts the name Meredith Crome for the street name register. Yeah. Yeah, yep. Meredith Crome and Jack Clark as opposed to Crome and Clark so yeah, no Crome and no Clark, just Jack Clark and names. Meredith Crome. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Yeah, quite a little bit of workshopping, but I think we've got... Okay, yeah, just quickly, Councillor Hennessy, just so we can make sure this is right. So Deputy Mayor Davies has moved that motion. Councillor Solomon, were you happy to second that? You are happy? Thank you. Are you happy if I just go to Councillor... Did you want to speak to that at the moment, Councillor Solomon, or are you happy if I just take a question? Yeah, I'll come back. I'll take a question. Councillor Hennessy, please go ahead.
I think part of the problem that I'm perceiving is that we have this thing called a street name register, and then we also try and put into that names that can be used for public spaces. Why don't we call it a street and public space name register? Because I think that would be clearer to us as elected members, but mostly it'd be clear because we're going to go out to the community and do consultation. And I think yeah, that would, because I was quite happy to allow Jack Clark to go through to a public space and Meredith Crome as well to public spaces. I can see, and I think Councillor Koch mentioned it before, that keeping the road names as simple as possible is valid. And having worked in emergency services, I know that can happen very easily. And I think sometimes when you're honouring a person, making it a public space, and this is not necessarily a park, we've got many other opportunities to do that, is a valid way of doing it. And as I circulated via email to the elected members, you know, we've got a basketball court adjacent to the Gawler Primary School that is without a name at the moment. That's the type of thing I think is more, you know, I think a road is a road. Personally, I think there's more honour, and you can see it in some of the reserves already named around the town. So I'll go with the majority on this, but I was actually happy to not use Clark for a road, and I prefer... Meredith does need to be acknowledged by both her names. So again, that would also go through public spaces. But my question is, can we please amend the name of the street register to a street and public space? Is that possible?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I might actually add to that question too and just ask the street name register. This is probably to Andrew or Wendy. In regards to the street name register, what else is that used for? Public spaces, street names. Is there other... defer to... No. David. Yeah, so what is the street, I guess extending from Councillor Hennessy's question, what is the street name register actually used for other than street names? That's the one. Yes, I'll ask David for a...
So through the chair, so the name register was originally used for only street names. It's only in the last few years that it's been changed to the public name register. To date, we haven't used any of the names for any public places.
Okay, so that's definitely an area if council wanted to proceed in naming spaces like the basketball court or other public sort of spaces, definitely that would be the opportunity, the list we would... I guess a further question of that, actually selecting the names, is it a selection process through council or is it a random sort of assignment of names depending on, obviously, if it hasn't been done to public spaces, but what would happen for a street name, for example, and then a public space?
Okay, so through the chair, so for a street name, what would occur is when you have a new development come to council, the developer will ask for what our policy is for naming of streets. Each council will have their own policy in place. Here, what we do is we provide the developer with the approved street name list. They can only select what's on that list. If they do want a different name, what has happened in the past is we've provided a report to council seeking a new name, and the new name needs to meet what's on the current street name policy, sorry.
Okay, thank you. And for a public space, as an example, how would that process go?
So the process would be similar, and I guess also the only difference would be often public places are named by the council itself. So the council would be presented with the list, and I guess the council could select whether they want to use a existing name or whether they want to adopt a new name for that particular place.
Okay, thanks, David. Yep, I'm just going to defer to Andrew just for a point of clarification.
Thank you, through the chair. I'm just conscious that we'll want to vote on this soon. But before you do, can I just flag a question? On page 33 of the agenda, it's really a case of how the policy itself operates. And I think maybe there's a way forward to achieve what I think might be the consensus in the room. I'm not sure what the consensus is until you vote, but let's assume that maybe there's a general level of support. Basically, what it says on page 33, going on to page 34, is that in accordance with section 332 of Council's policy, names need to be appropriately based on the following criteria. 332, unduly long names and names composed of two or more words should be avoided except where. And then I'm looking at 3321. It says, an individual's given name together with a family name is essential to identify the person or where it is necessary to avoid ambiguity. And that would make some sense with, say, Meredith Crome, perhaps, maybe with Jack Clark. But I just worry about the way the policy is written because by the letter of the law, I think David's right, which it says the use of given names will generally be avoided. But I think the first sentence overrides that, which is you need Meredith there to understand the reference to Crome. That makes sense. And maybe that's also true of Jack Clark. Clark by itself is not going to work, but Jack Clark does. But I'm just worried also because I think it says something about not using first names. The use of given names will generally be avoided, but it says generally. So you're probably okay because maybe council's view is this is an exception and maybe you want us to go back and review the policy. And maybe you're okay this time anyway based on your resolution. But I just flag it because I think you need to be aware of it.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm just going to loop back and go Councillor Solomon Samble, then Deputy Mayor.
Just to clarify, just because I'm not sure the motion's quite there yet, sorry everyone, but what I'd said to Councillor Davis before is that it would say with a preference, the note would, essentially there would be a note that remains that it's a preference that it be used as a name for a public space. So it currently reads as if it's either or, but in my view, if we put up with a preference for a public space, it could be used for a road, but we sort of avoiding some of the issues that Andrew just mentioned there by essentially saying, well, if there's no public space, it will be used for a road. But if there is an option for public space, maybe it actually merits having that name given to it. That's what I originally said, but obviously that's in the hands of the deputy mayor, if that's what was understood. Yeah. So if we could have the motion.
So we're looking at changing the motion. So with consent of the mover and the seconder, and leave of the meeting to adjust to say with preference for public spaces. Is that what we're after? Yeah. So on both. So does the mover and seconder have leave of the meeting to do that? Just a show of hands, please. If you. Yep, it's 2/3. So yes, thank you. So Nikita, if we could please adjust. Yeah. So points 2 and 4 with preference for public spaces. Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Councillor Hennessy. Deputy Mayor, it's up to you, but I'd probably prefer that we just simplify this whole
look, if we're going to... I was originally just going to mostly let it be, but we can merge 1 and 2 and we can merge 3 and 4. You can just add to number 1, you can say as a street name or public space with preference for public spaces, or however you write that, and do the same with the other one.
So I'll just leave Andrew to assist Nikita. I think we understand the sentiment around that. While that's being done, sorry, Councillor Hennessy, what was your question? Sorry.
So my question was, can we rename the street name register Street and Public Space Register, please?
Sorry, Councillor Hennessy. I think I commandeered your question, so my apologies. David, for that process for renaming the street name policy, street name register, how would we go about that?
So we can just change the name. It's just a existing document name, so we can easily change it.
So I might suggest, thanks David, I might actually suggest when the minute taker's finished, we might just add another point with consent of the mover. No worries, Councillor Hennessy, I think that clarifies. And seeing as it was a relatively new gesture to make public spaces name from the street name register, it makes sense we need to catch up with that. So we'll just wait for the minute taker. Thanks, Nikita. So just still working on it? No worries. Deputy Mayor, you've moved the motion, so we'll just hold off on a minute. Is there any further? Councillor Samble.
Thank you. But I was going to mention about the point that what Councillor Hennessy said was that this, what we've received in the attachment tonight, it says a road name register. Well, to have that as road and special place registered is something, but Andrew's mentioned that maybe it's at a later date. We change that or whatever. But the topic about what has been raised by Member for Light, Tony Piccolo, and all that, I can't work it out, because in this register, which is obviously the Bible that our council goes by to give to the developers, on page 112 in here, there's Doug Day Road. On page 115 in here is Rowley Day can be named a road. And also on page 116 is Trish McConnell Road. So there's 2 names in this register, which is our Bible we're going by anyway. So I don't know why the discussion's all about Meredith Crone was an excellent citizen of this town, the same with Jack Clark. I mean, you know, you young people probably don't even know who they were, and I can tell you they were fantastic. If anybody deserves a name, they do, and I support the original motion, and Cody, you're too young to know even who they were.
Thanks, Councillor Samble. So I think too, I think that's a good point, is the second sort of part of this motion is actually that list hasn't been updated for over 10 years now, so we would be looking at going to community and asking for suggestions, which from discussing with staff earlier today, last time that occurred in 2011, I believe, there was huge community uptake with community members and elected members at the time submitting names. So I think that's a sort of, we'll clarify, and we might get some additional people on that list, Councillor Samble, and update it for, especially with all these new developments.
There's already double names on there.
Yes, yeah.
So,
Councillor Hennessy.
Sorry, so at the risk of do we, given what the acting CEO, do we want to include something about a revisit of this policy? Because it is very confusing. This policy, the street name policy and the public spaces policy, to me, we could even consider, because they're almost identical, and then we could take out some of that lack of clarity, which is, or as Councillor Samble, there's inconsistencies already, and I provided a whole range of other ones. My preference, of course, is to even the gender imbalance, but I'm sure the community will come back to us with lots of suggestions on that.
No, good points, Councillor Hennessy. I will ask the acting CEO, when is the policy up for review next? Are you aware that? Sorry to put you on the spot.
March 2025.
Okay. So, Councillor Hennessy, just correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe you're suggesting a policy review. Would that be staff presenting a policy review, or are you thinking more of a workshop? No, not another workshop. But maybe staff just bringing forward the policy review and seeing what can be done and then presenting that back to this committee potentially?
I'd like the staff to comment on that. I mean, I'm not meaning to burden them with yet another thing, but it seems to me that because we're going to go out for community consultation, this might be a really good time to bring that forward and make those changes before we go out to the community.
I might just go to Andrew, feasibility-wise. You can review anything. I understand your sentiment, Councillor Hennessy. If potentially we could leave it in the administration staff's hands and say we want to rename it, and through the process of the community consultation, if there is scope to review it when the community consultation and engagement's done, we could leave that in the administration's hands as a potential solution and see feasibly if that worked, because I understand exactly where you're coming from, but I also understand that if we instruct staff too much in here, it may bog down, and I'm not saying this isn't important, but there's probably some other priorities, so it's up to you. Okay. Andrew's just said he can take it on notice and come back with a response, and then if we want to progress it further, maybe that could be in the form of a motion on notice. Is that all right with you, Councillor Hennessy? Yep. I understand your sentiment completely, and I think it's a great idea, and I'm sure that the staff could think of an innovative way to review the process through the engagement as well, review the policy at the same time. Yep. Great, thank you. Okay, is there any further discussion around the current motion recommendation? Councillor Shanks.
Yeah, look, good conversations. I guess picking up on Councillor Samble's point, you know, as generations roll through, without the acknowledgement of these community champions, we actually do have we do fall into the position of forgetting the personalities that contributed so much throughout their town. So I think this is a respectful way to capture, again, those community champions, which is why our local MP has brought it forward. I think this is a logical way forward, and I'm heartened to hear the staff's pivot in the space. And yes, there's still some technical teasing out to do in making sure we're clear. To be honest, I think it's just a public spaces register and then that's it, realistically, as name-wise. But we'll work through that, and the policy review being up and needing to be done by March next year, it doesn't push it out to a nonsense time frame either. So, you know, I think we've shown some due diligence here, and I think we can all agree that there might be some inconsistencies of the past that we're identifying, and we probably will identify more moving forward through the process. But the reality is these two great personalities that we're hopefully now going to honour, one of the ways that we do with the great names of our town, will flow through. And, you know, Jack Cooper Drive isn't named Jack Cooper Drive because we worried about the double naming. Yeah, and you've got a Cooper Road. Yeah, absolutely, Deputy Mayor. So I think this applies the right logic, and updating the policies and the public spaces and the like might get that logic applied, so we don't end up in these sorts of conversations, albeit very good, but you know, some of our policies will be able to pick up the logic, I think, once we get that updated version rolling through.
Thanks, Councillor Shanks. Just quickly, a syntax, Nikita, just in regards to point 5, I think point 5 may need to read, recommends to council that council renames the register. I think that might be, if that's right with you, Deputy Mayor. Council renames the register. Thank you. Okay, is there any further discussion? Oh, Councillor Solomon?
Really quickly, just want to say...
You might need leave of the meeting to speak
I haven't
again.
actually spoken
haven't?
yet.
Oh, you haven't either?
No, sorry.
I apologise, that's my fault, we went way off track.
I want to speak quickly and just
Please
say
speak.
that I think the inclusion of the full name of Meredith Crome there is really important. Obviously, someone who, you know, as Brian said, you know, some of us young people might not know that. Good thing two of us are studying history and the other one works for the History Trust. But you know, of course, you know, someone who's very significant, particularly to the council here, a lot of her achievements, you know, are noted as being achievements of someone who was the first woman to do a number of things. I think appreciating that and really emphasise, you know, giving the full name, you know, make sure that that's there for the public to see and to acknowledge. And of course, the public spaces there, I understand that some of the things that Andrew picked up on there. I think having a preference for public spaces is really good because it pays respect to both of them with their full name there, while also trying to avoid, where we can, some of the confusion that might arise having them as street names. So I'll support the motion.
Thanks, Councillor Solomon. Is there any further discussion? No. Deputy Mayor, would you like to close the debate?
Yeah, look, it's been very good. Well, not sure I'd even call it a debate, rather a collaborative discussion on the wording of the motion. I think, you know, and that's sort of what I focused on in my initial thing, but I will mention that part of the reason I'm supporting this is also because these are very notable and interesting people from our town. Meredith Crome was... we were talking recently about, you know, making our committees and stuff more efficient. You know, there's a little... When she joined the council, apparently they had 29 subcommittees, which she helped in bringing down. I imagine they weren't all monthly, but it does sound chaotic. And then eventually when she did retire from the council, it was because of a conflict of interest with her role as the president of the Local Government Association, due to a boundary dispute that Gawler was having around boundary reform back in the 80s. So very, very interesting life, lots going on there. Yeah, so the cycles of history. And yeah, Jack Clark, a very long time, I think 20 years or so as the MP for Gawler, which is a record that our current local MP is almost caught up to. I think he's at 18 now, so... yeah, I'm happy to, you know, move this motion. Hope everyone supports it.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. The debate's closed. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That's carried unanimously. Okay, thank you. We'll move on. We've got 21 minutes, so let's see if we can do this. 8.4, I believe we've got a couple conflicts. Councillor Lorna.
Yes, thank you. I have a material conflict of interest as I sit on the board for the Norma. I don't agree with this, but I will be leaving the room. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Chair. I have a material conflict of interest because I sit on the board of Norma. I will deal with this by leaving the chamber. I don't think there's anything else I need to say.
Thank you. We'll just allow Councillors Lorna and Solomon to leave the room. Thank you for your cooperation. Okay, we have an officer's recommendation regarding Norma's cash advance facility. Mayor Redmond, happy to move. Would you like to speak?
I think it's very straightforward, so I reserve, I won't be speaking. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you. A seconder, please. Councillor Hennessy, would you like to speak? No. Is there any discussion? Councillor Koch?
Thanks, Chair. Look, I'll be voting against this, and I'll be doing that on a principled position. I've held a position on this for a number of years, I suppose. my view is I think Norma's got itself into a bit of a financial pickle. I think it's overextended. If you look closely at the report, they are currently finalising the fibre polishing plant, the Paraka Research Road resource centre there, upgrading the landfill alternative project, and also doing landfill rehabilitation at Ulibri. I'm very concerned that that because they're overextended in these areas, they'll continue to come back to councils requesting more and more funds. And I think by providing this advance opportunity, it just allows Norma to continue to spend and spend. I'm concerned about the landfill alternative project in particular. In the next couple of months, it will become public, it will go to community consultation. I think there's a great risk towards Norma and also our council reputationally when that project is announced. I'm also concerned whether long-term that alternative is actually financially viable for our council. So I have grave concerns, short-term and long-term. So I'll be voting against this. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Koch. Is there any further discussion? No, no worries. Mayor, are you happy if I put that motion? All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? It's carried. Thank you. If we could just get Councillors Lorna and Solomon, please. Thanks, Bryce. We'll just wait for them to return to the room. Thank you. Okay, item 8.5, Stobie Pole's painting policy. Now I'm going to go to Councillor Hennessy. She submitted an alternate motion earlier today. Councillor Hennessy, do you want to present that or?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as I foreshadowed, I will move the motion, but I would like to add a second point into it. I thank staff for bringing our attention to the fact that this policy, the Stobie Pole policy, is out of date, but I would like to ask that a report on the creation of a public art policy with associated guidelines that make it clearer for our community as to how they can engage in the creation of public art be brought back to the relevant council or committee meeting. The reason I do that is I think it's time that we have a policy that talks globally about all the different forms of public art in our community. We've spent a lot of time recently talking about mural paintings, both on public infrastructure and also on private. We've seen various organisations create public art, and I'm thinking about the mosaic wall in Walker Place. And it occurs to me that there's obviously community groups who would like to do Stobie Pole painting, but I also things like the Zonta yarn bombing that's happened I think 3 times in the community. I think we need to have a global policy that just makes it very clear that we support all sections of the community in being involved, and some guidelines as to how they can interact with council or the more appropriate organisation to get that going. So I seek the support of the elected members.
Thanks, Councillor. So just to confirm, the motion that's on the screen at the moment, is that what you're happy with? Yep, thank you. Mayor Redman?
I think it should come back to a committee meeting rather than a council meeting, and it should be the CCS committee meeting. Yeah, it should be the CCS committee meeting.
I'll just ask for a bit of clarification. Should CC? Yeah. So, Councillor Hennessy, are you happy to adjust? Yep, no worries. So we'll leave the meeting. Is everyone okay if we move that? Thank you. So we'll just change that to be brought to the CCS committee meeting. Yep, point of clarification.
Thank you. Just as a pro for Councillor Hennessy, I think you mentioned something at the beginning of your statement about the existing policy being out of date or thereabouts. I don't want to misrepresent what you said, but I think that's what you said. I guess the clarification I was just trying to provide or to check with you is that my understanding from what was said by Susie was more that it duplicated an existing framework that was run by basically the pole owner, and that our policy is redundant But if the view of the room is you want a report on it, we can provide a report. We can provide a policy if you want a policy. I suspect we probably have too many policies in Globo, but I'm not saying you don't want one or shouldn't have one for this, but I just flag it.
Thank you. You're right, it's a redundant rather than a out of date. Yeah, I'm still going to ask that we have a public art. And we were provided with a particularly good example, so that's the type of thing I'm looking for.
Thanks, Councillor Hennessy. And I think it does tie into discussions we've had in previous months regarding murals, for example, and how we go about selecting or what the so I think this could tie a whole bunch of things in together. And the example you sent through the City of Charlestown as well, and how they refer to their Stobie Pole policy, is an example I'm sure staff will take into consideration. So we move Councillor Hennessy. Mayor Redman, happy to second it. Would you like to speak?
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a really good part 2, public art policy. We desperately need a public art policy so that our community can engage in the creation of public art, be brought back to the Corporate and Community Services Committee meeting. I think this is a really good way forward, and yeah, we're in desperate need of a public art policy. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Redman. So moved Councillor Hennessy, seconded Mayor Redman. Any discussion? Councillor Solomon.
Yes, quickly. I just referring back to what I said in my email earlier today, in response to Councillor Hennessy suggesting she might move this amendment, that there's currently a mural motion on the books about how we encourage community members, private investment in murals, etc. I've sought some advice from governance, and the best way to deal with that would be to rescind part of that motion in this next CCS committee meeting, and essentially ask that we tie it into the creation of this new policy, should it pass, and then that will cover that. So that, I think what in the end we'll get to, and what Councillor Hennessy is pushing for, is a sort of comprehensive set of, or a comprehensive policy, maybe with some guidelines in there somewhere, but something which says this is the standard that we expect of public art. Here's how we might go about encouraging that. And it's one document, it's all in the same place, we're not having any duplication, and we're not having staff produce 2 separate reports on things that could have been in the same report together.
Thanks, Councillor Solomon. Is there any further discussion? No? Okay. Councillor Hennessy, are you happy if I put that motion? Okay, members, I'm going to put that motion. All those in favour? Thank you. Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay. Information reports, item 9.1, Climate Emergency Action Plan Implementation Update. Tim Kelly's been waiting patiently in the back too. We do have 12 minutes, so Tim, if you would like to come up to the lectern, and if members have any questions in regards to the report, now is your opportunity when we can ask Tim. So, Mayor, you're happy to move? Yep, we'll move it first.
I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation that the Infrastructure and Environmental Services Committee notes the Climate Emergency Action Plan Implementation Update report. I think, as usual, Tim, you write really, really, really good reports, and I love reading your reports. I'm gradually understanding them. So, yeah, I think I love how you put your Town of Gawler greenhouse gas emissions to 22-23. I love that. I love how you put a pie graph. I love it. I love it. I love everything you do. So, yeah, well done, Tim.
Thanks, Mayor. Do we have a seconder, members? Deputy Mayor, would you like to speak to the item?
Just the second what the Mayor said.
Hilarious. Councillor Koch.
Got a question, so
that's okay. Sorry, everyone. I know we're having a good time.
Something.
Yeah, I am conscious. We'll ask Tim some questions as well.
Just quickly, page 50 or 53. It talks about the greenhouse emissions going down. What's the driver behind that? Because it's gone from 179 down to 141,000. What's the driver behind that, and can we expect more?
Thank you, Councillor Kosh. Through the chair, sorry. Thank you, Councillor Kosh, for your question. Yes, the devil's in the detail with all of this. The reason why the emissions in the community sector are going down and why that's picked up by the snapshot reporting are largely because of South Australia's renewable electricity generation. And I say that there's a word of caution there because that uses the location-based approach, which is based on South Australia claiming all of the renewable electricity it generates. And things are in a transition. I think keep an eye out for what the outcomes of the climate active consultation will be. They're expected shortly, and I think there'll be an increasing move to market-based accounting, and I could expect to see in the future that the accounting method for community emissions might change as well, so they reflect the emissions that South Australians are actually purchasing through their mandatory and voluntary payments. So they might go up in the future, but largely it's all from electricity because the emissions factor for electricity consumption is coming down. Conversely, transport emissions proportionally are going up in the community sector because that's related to fuel being burnt, and you can't sort of hide from that through an accounting method.
Yeah, of course, Councillor Kosh.
Just quickly on page 47 of 53, you're talking about charging stations. There's actually a fast charger being installed at Gawler Park, but it hasn't been commissioned yet. Yep, there's one that, yeah.
Through the chair, thank you, Councillor Kosh. Yes, I'd been hearing some mention about that. I look forward to it being commissioned because we really need one in Gawler. And we probably need more than one in Gawler because the amount of electric vehicles coming onto the road are significant, and there are people coming to Gawler either from Adelaide or from the country hoping to get a fast charge to complete their journeys, and there's not fast charging here. So it does include in the report that we're asking for market interest of any players that would like to build, own and operate rapid chargers in Gawler and see what we can do to help attract them to here.
Thanks, Councillor Kosh. Now, Tim, I believe next week you're heading with the Mayor to the National Climate Conference, is that correct? So you'll be, can you just give us a brief rundown of what you'll be presenting on quickly?
Yes, thank you. So I'll be presenting on the advocacy of the town of Gawler in an advocacy workshop, describing what we're doing to advocate for clear and consistent rules for renewable electricity and carbon offsets, to take some of this confusion and uncertainty in what we report, in how to avoid greenwashing, and in ensuring fairness in what we buy, because there's a lot of confusion at the moment, even with the state review of the climate legislation. There's a drive to only have a generation target, but what does that mean when it's less clear, when it's not communicated to community stakeholders and councils whether they should be buying renewable electricity to reduce our emissions or just try to coast off what everyone else is doing. So those issues really do need clarity.
Fantastic. And all the best for the presentation. And if it would be feasible, I think, for you to report back to this committee or even just an electronic sort of rundown of what you've presented and how it all went, I think would be really beneficial for this committee. And I think it's a great opportunity for yourself personally and the Mayor and the town of Gawler. So, yeah, enjoy and best of luck.
Thank you, Chair. I will certainly do that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Members, is there any other discussion on this item? No. Mayor, are you happy if I put that motion? No worries. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 10. There's no items listed for discussion. There's no items listed for discussion at future meetings. Are there any questions without notice, members? Councillor Solomon.
Very quick one. With the recent announcement of the gather round coming to the Barossa, will there be conversations between staff and the state government about public transport options, particularly given that the Gawler train line ends here, and we want to encourage people to be using that corridor and coming into the town as well?
Good question. And I also, just to add to that, I do believe there's a motion on the books about a plan for gather round, which was put out by the Deputy Mayor some time ago. Andrew, are you happy to take that question on notice? Yeah, and then provide an answer. That would be fantastic. Is there any other questions without notice, members? No. Is there any motions without notice? No. Brilliant. The next meeting of the IS will be the 11th of June, commencing at 7 o'clock. Thank you, members and staff, for your endurance and support tonight, and I'll close the meeting at 10:55 p.m. Thank you.